The Reverend Canon Hardingham will now say prayers.
Thank you. It's very good to be able to join you, even though it's over the phone. But let us pray now for the work of this council, and particularly for the meeting that we're holding this evening. O God, our Father, we pray for the work of this council in the current pandemic, for councillors, staff and health officials, as they work together for the welfare of the Bolton family. May they fulfil their duties with singleness of purpose, wisely and faithfully exercising the authority committed to them, that they may promote the common good of our town and advance your kingdom among us. We ask this through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. And a prayer for this meeting.
Amen.
Eternal God, from whom comes all wisdom and understanding, we pray for this meeting tonight. During these uncertain times for our town and region, in all our discussions and decisions, help us to faithfully discharge the duty entrusted to us, that we may promote the health, safety and well-being of this borough. Help us to work together to enable the best outcome for each person we represent. We ask all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Good evening, and thank you, Canon Hardingham, for joining us this evening and saying the prayers. Members of the council, it's time to start the full council meeting. Mr. Mulholland, would you confirm whether we have any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have apologies from councillors Morris, McMulkin, Wilkinson and Morgan. Thank you.
Welcome to this meeting. I am Councillor Mrs Thomas. I am the Mayor of Bolton Council for this municipal year. All Bolton councillors are invited to attend this meeting this evening. Officers present include the Chief Executive, Tony Oakman, John Duckett, who is providing technical support for this meeting, Ian Mulholland, Deputy Democratic Services Manager, and Helen Gorman, Borough Solicitor. I'd like to begin the meeting tonight by passing on my thanks once again, and the thanks of all the members of the council to the people of Bolton during these very difficult times. I'm very keen to support local businesses and organisations, and if you would like me to visit your business or your organisation when it is appropriate, please contact the Mayor's office. The details are on the council website. Remembrance Sunday and Armistice Day will soon be here, and it's important as a town that we commemorate these occasions. Our arrangements are going to be very different this year. Please look out for the announcements on social media and on the council's website for the most up-to-date information. Are there any declarations of interest? There doesn't appear to be any declarations of interest.
Madam Mayor, the next item of business is to confirm the minutes of the meetings of the council held on the 2nd of September 2020.
Are these approved?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Madam Mayor, the next item of business is a motion in the name of Councillor Dean regarding appointments to committees.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Can I formally move the appointments and changes to membership as listed on the order paper? Thank you.
Councillor Curran?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I formally second the motion. Thank you.
Are these agreed?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Aye.
I declare the motion is carried. The next item of business is to consider questions under Standing Order 9(a).
Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members. Just after people in Bolton had started to finally be able to book tests online for COVID, we heard that official figures showed how the UK has recorded a further addition of 22,961 cases of COVID after the Secretary of State for Health confirmed thousands of missing cases between the 25th of September and the 2nd of October. This was due to a marked technical issue in the handling of important COVID testing data, and it meant that important trace work on this data just got missed out. We really do need test and trace to make Bolton safer. It is only through this data that our professionals will be able to tell us if the borough is getting safer. The data error was yet more dangerous government failure. The Secretary of State says 48,000 people had been exposed to COVID as a result of the Excel data mess, and there was no information then as to how many of the people had been contacted and were shielding. The Prime Minister said England was to have a world-beating system to track this virus. It is nothing of the sort. The testing fiasco is a direct result of long-standing Conservative cuts to public health and their dogmatic obsession with outsourcing to private companies. Instead of throwing money at these private firms with poor track records, government should give local public health the control for trace to keep us safe. Councils have been asking for months for a greater role in contact tracing. Shame on the government if they are saying we can have it in Bolton if Bolton agrees to very high COVID restrictions. Is all of the COVID trace work today running effectively for the people of the Bolton Borough?
Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Howarth, for your question. Following the announcement that a large number of delayed cases had been released into the reporting system, a local analysis was undertaken to understand the impact of the delays for Bolton residents. Data on the new cases is released nationally each evening on the coronavirus staging website and includes case counts at a local, regional and national level. The daily release of case data by the national team typically includes data for tests carried out over the previous 5-day period. The local analysis found that over the 3 days between the 3rd and the 5th of October, the majority of new cases received were tests taken from the 23rd of September onwards, although some dated back to the 16th of September. We have been advised that the individuals to whom the data related all received their positive test results and advised to isolate in the usual way. However, the results for these individuals were delayed in being transferred to NHS Test and Trace for contact tracing. We estimate that this delay was as much as 9 to 10 days for some contacts, which would have limited the value of contact tracing for these individuals. However, for those within the shorted time period, then they will have been contacted via the normal routes. Thank you.
Councillor Zaman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The previous Labour Council secured an investment of 100 million to regenerate Bolton Town Centre in 2017-18, which would be a catalyst for the attraction of private sector investment, creating thousands of new jobs and houses. It wouldn't be wrong to say that redevelopment of Crompton Place was and is a key component of this scheme. The people of Bolton are waiting anxiously for this development work to start, and quite rightly so. According to the original timetable, the work was due to start in early 2021, and the planning application stated that demolition work would begin in January 2021. Could the Deputy Leader give assurance to the Council that the funding package to secure this development is fully in place and no additional Council funding is required over what was originally anticipated? In addition, can the Deputy Leader inform Council if demolition work is still due to start in January, and if not, when he foresees this important project getting underway? Thank you.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Madam Member, Madam Mayor, members of the Council. Crompton Place funding is complicated, to put it mildly, but it should be viewed as really two parts. The Council funding is to secure ownership and vacant possession of Crompton Place. This has already been approved and officers do not anticipate any further council funding being required to achieve this objective. The second part of the funding of Crompton Place is the funding to secure the new development scheme. This is the responsibility of the developer, and once they have finalised their design and calculated associated detailing costs, we expect them to be in a position to secure the investment funding needed to deliver their proposal, their new development proposal scheme. The start date of the demolition works is dependent on several factors, including the need to secure vacant possession, satisfy necessary planning requirements, and finalise design work and produce flexible design options that reflect changes in real estate requirements as a result of COVID-19. These factors, together with the impact of COVID-19 on our retailers' ability to agree major relocation plans, means it will most likely be Q4 of 2021 before the developers are able to start major demolition works. Madam Mayor, COVID-19 has been a public crisis like no other. Its effects have had a huge impact on economic activity. Last quarter, figures showed an economic contraction of 20%. And as we know, this global pandemic is far from over. How this will play out in terms of our regeneration plans is impossible to predict, and I'm certainly not going to speculate. The senior management team in place and our partners are focused on finding financing options, and we will report back to Council once we know more details. I would like to take this opportunity though, Madam Mayor, to remind members that the £100 million of borrowing was predicated on the airport dividend making the repayments. That dividend has now been cancelled for the foreseeable future. And to make matters more difficult, the Council is now having to borrow money to support the airport through this time of crisis. This, Madam Mayor, is just one example of the economic consequences of COVID-19. I have no doubt there will be others. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Ishmael.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This question is being asked on behalf of Councillor McMulkin, who wasn't able to attend the meeting this evening. So the question is to Councillor Warren. According to Shelter, an estimated 227,000 adult private renters have fallen into arrears since the start of the pandemic, meaning they could lose their homes when the evictions ban ended on 23rd of August. The total number of private renters in arrears in the last 12 months has now reached 442,000 adults, double what it was in the same period last year, and that's an estimated 21,000 renters facing eviction in Greater Manchester alone. What is worse, the Shelter study reveals that 174,000 private tenants have already been threatened with eviction by their landlord or letting agent, with the independent reporting that illegal evictions have already surged 50% in some areas since the coronavirus pandemic began. Under the current court system, anyone who accrues rent arrears of 8 weeks or more can be automatically evicted, in addition to the risk of being subjected to a Section 21 no-fault eviction. This demonstrates the terrifying impact of the pandemic on private renters' finances. This is only likely to get worse for many renters as the furlough scheme draws to a close and millions could lose their jobs. The Housing Secretary promised no one would lose their home because of the coronavirus. That is increasingly looking like another Tory empty promise. Therefore, can the executive member confirm whether they have, one, assess the likely number of actions relating to COVID-19 arrears? If so, what is the assessed number? Secondly, assess the impact of increased evictions related to COVID-19 arrears. If so, what is the projected impact? And secondly, can the exec member confirm what steps they have taken and what resources they have allocated to, one, protect private renters from eviction, two, identify what additional measures need to be put in place to prevent evictions, three, what additional resources need to be allocated to mitigate the impact of evictions, if so, what resources, and finally, I appreciate this is a mouthful, but finally, what additional resources have they allocated to rehouse those evicted to whom the council owes a duty of care? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Ishmael. In our experience, not all arrears cases lead to evictions. The scale of new universal credit claimants requiring assistance with housing costs and the likely increase in unemployment following the ending of furlough will inevitably result in a significant increase in activity in this area. Before possession cases were transferred to Manchester County Court, we would typically achieve positive prevention in over 80% of cases that we advised on. However, since these have been transferred to Manchester County Court, this has become more difficult to advise on the day of the hearing. Bolton's possession cases are not all listed together, so on the day of the court hearing, liaison is extremely limited. This generally results in a high level of possessions as a proportion of proceedings. As you may be aware, the council, together with other GM leaders, recently wrote to government calling for an extension in the temporary eviction bans that was introduced in response to the COVID pandemic. This was extended to the 20th of September. This response was successful, and the right of longer notice for social and private rented tenants was also introduced, and this is now 6 months, and there's also been an increase in the local housing allowance. There is a 4-week notice period if the arrears are of more than 6 months. We strongly advise any tenant in receipt of a notice seeking possession to seek advice regarding the validity of the notice received. We often find that these notices served may not be valid. We are analysing cases to have a clearer picture of the work we have to do. We are also developing ways to predict the likely flow of expected casework, including the split between families and single persons. We're also developing a suite of interventions that can help assess the potential need for additional temporary accommodation capacity and for additional prevention staffing capacity. The current position regarding temporary accommodation is particularly challenging. Whilst there has been a steady overall increase in homelessness presentations post-initial lockdown, they have not yet risen to pre-COVID levels. However, the ability of move-on accommodation for those being assisted through temporary accommodation has decreased markedly. We are therefore anticipating the need to increase temporary stepping stone accommodation units, and we're also working with our revenue and benefits team to look at additional preventative interventions that we may be able to put in place, for example through targeted use of the discretionary housing payments, and encouraging those affected to seek early advice. We can help tenants mediate with landlords. The key is to mitigate, where possible, the distress and upset of homelessness by implementation of early prevention measures. We have also asked GMCA to liaise with the county courts to encourage them to provide specific listing information detailing all Section 21 proceedings by borough, and help to ensure that relevant details of tenancy possessions proceedings are provided to the relevant local authority. This would at least provide some opportunity to make contact at the earliest stage to engage in early prevention activity. However, we have not yet had a response to this request. In terms of managing presentations from households facing homelessness, all casework is assessed and assistance provided on the merits of the individual cases. Clearly, arrears cases that are truly affected by changing financial circumstances due to COVID will be viewed sympathetically. The Council also has a responsibility to carefully assess individual cases, and legislation sets out that assessment process. We would advise anybody living in the borough who has been served a Section 21 notice or is subject to possession proceedings to contact Bolton Housing Options. In addition, the Citizens Advice Bureau has extra available resources and is able to access funding outside the borough to assist our residents, as they have a legal aid contracting housing law. The government have committed more funds for legal aid through the COVID crisis. It is vitally important that any resident that is facing eviction asks for help. Thank you.
Apologies, my microphone went. Thank you, Councillor Warren. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Council. Since the COVID-19 pandemic hit our borough in March, there has been an unprecedented and rapid acceleration of the digitalisation of many forms of interaction within the Council and to the Council. There's been a huge increase in the role of the voluntary sector and an unforeseen and difficult demands being placed on our police service officers and volunteers in all these three areas. And can I say they've done a tremendous job in responding to these challenges. All three of these areas fall under the remit of the Cabinet Member for Stronger Communities, Councillor Muslim. However, as the major opposition spokesperson for this portfolio, I'm extremely disappointed that Councillor Muslim has only held one meeting since lockdown, with 2 meetings being cancelled due to there being no business. I must, however, thank him for the reply to my email on struggling charities, and also the report of the Bolton Fund on the same day. Whilst I appreciate that some of these areas are reported informally to Recovery Board, the leader will be aware that the Recovery Board is not an official meeting of the Council. Does the leader agree with me that Council members need to be kept up to date on a regular basis on the voluntary sector, digitalisation and policing during COVID-19 via regular reports from Councillor Muslim? If so, will he ensure that no more scheduled meetings of Councillor Muslim's portfolio are cancelled due to an incorrect conclusion that there is no business? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Muslim.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As a long-standing member of the Council, Councillor Murray is all too well aware that formal portfolio holder meetings are held to take decisions. They are not there to provide a discussion forum, and if there are no decisions to be taken, they are quite rightly cancelled. However, I am glad that Councillor Murray has asked this question, because it gives me the opportunity to inform members of the success of the decisions that I've previously taken in supporting our residents during the ongoing pandemic. Key to the Council's response has been the decision to establish the Bolton Fund as a means of supporting our voluntary sector organisations in crucial themed areas. Key examples of this are 59 community groups across Bolton, benefiting from £50,000 of support from Bolton's Fund COVID-19 Resilience Grant. And this was rapidly developed and stepped up, providing support for VCSE groups to respond quickly to the impact of COVID-19. And successful projects include Senior Solutions, who were awarded £1,000, and that was to enable Senior Solutions to address the increased demand to provide telephone befriending and support to reduce isolation for older people in Bolton. Age UK, who also received £1,000 to deliver support remotely for older people during the pandemic. And Zach's Youth Bar, who received £520 to take their youth services online for young people. And Bolton's fund for the COVID-19 engagement round, which is currently live, and it's been made operational in a matter of days and is accepting applications for small grants from VCSE groups who are able to engage with communities to increase understanding about how to protect yourself and others from getting and transmitting the virus. And projects funded so far include the Youth Lead, previously Explode, to educate and inform young Boltonians on the impact of COVID-19. The Harmony Youth Project, producing a rap music video to engage young people and to increase understanding of COVID-19 and help to protect themselves. And Backup Northwest, supporting 16 to 25-year-old homeless young people to participate in safe practices that protect them against COVID-19 infection. And I'm also pleased to inform members that this is just this week. Just this week, in fact, we've launched the Bolton's Fund Emergency Food and Essential Supply Round, which is £250,000 to support groups who are working with those in need as a result of COVID-19. And a presentation of the Bolton Fund programme for the remainder of the year was also given to Corporate and External Issues Scrutiny Committee on the 24th of August. And as the major opposition spokesperson, I know that Councillor Murray received a briefing on the voluntary sector in early July, but if she would like another one, then I'm more than happy for the team to have this arranged for her. And during the pandemic, the council has also been working extremely successfully in quickly moving to a more digital way of working and communicating and supporting our residents. The Corporate Scrutiny Committee will receive a presentation on this at the end of October, but in summary, we have been successful in a local digital project bid with the government for our scan station, which will enable residents to scan their own evidence in support of a variety of services, starting with revenue and benefits. We've begun planning the refurbishment and reconfiguration of the one-stop shop to support vital interactions with residents and reduce the need for face-to-face contact. We've implemented the Verint CRM system that will improve the way we store customer data and interact with residents. We've continued with our improvement and development of the website to support residents to interact with the council online. This will also support the reduction of paper interactions, for example, the ability for residents to securely upload evidence. And as a member of the Be Safe Partnership, Councillor Murray has also been offered a briefing in this area for crime and supporting the Be Safe Partnership. But it is disappointing to be told that she hasn't actually taken up this offer, as clearly work on this partnership is key to her role. But finally, we do have that weekly recovery board in which all updates are provided and questions are clarified for political leaders to brief onto their groups or ask questions on their behalf. This recovery board is attended by the leader of the Labour group, as well as the deputy leader and Councillor Howarth. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Muslim. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members. I thought I'd raise this question to the Leader of the Council from a number of perspectives. First and foremost, as a ward councillor for my area. Secondly, as a former soldier. And thirdly, as a resident of a ward. And I just would like some clarification in terms of marking Remembrance Sunday and what it actually means to council. I certainly I learned many skills to my credit, which I didn't previously have. Some of the experiences I can talk about and some I'm not allowed to. As a way of life, the military is a learning curve for everybody, but I think it has to be acknowledged that many young persons, as is the case, go and give their ultimate sacrifice. And I think we as an authority should support and recognise that wherever we can. Now, I understand the present conditions, the pandemic, etc., and the limitations that makes upon us as an authority with a duty of care, and many residents who are wishing to pay their respects. I hope that the leader accepts this in the spirit that it's meant. It's meant as a preventative measure and to support those that have suffered in the past, that continue to suffer through various experiences, whether that be a physical injury or in many cases mental injury. But the day itself is a very important day, as I'm sure he would appreciate. So without further ado, Madam Mayor, I'll read the question to the leader. I would anticipate that many wish to pay their respects, but in doing so, we must ensure this does not promote a potential risk of a contagious spike in COVID-19. In my ward and across the wider borough, these events are well attended. What support and guidance can we expect from the council to ensure that these events take place so we can honour those that have made the ultimate sacrifice, and accordingly our aim should be to hold the event in the safest way possible? I would question to Councillor Greenhouse to respond, not with a mixed message that we're constantly getting at the moment from the government. I want to clear, the government often does get things confused. I think in this case, a statement that allows the necessary arrangements to be made in good time to enable Remembrance Day to take place in the safest possible way. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Greenosh.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the question, Councillor Evans. Let me try and be as clear as I possibly can be, and to speak personally, if I may, at first, to say that Remembrance Sunday is probably one of the most, if not the most, important days in the civic calendar, and it's absolutely right that it is. And I speak as the son of a navigator in the Second World War, and brought up from a very early age to recognise the huge importance of Remembrance Sunday and remembering those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. So I come from that point of view to begin with, acknowledging that this is a key day for many, many people who will be extremely disappointed and frustrated that because of the situation we find ourselves in, we are now having to discuss different ways in which we remember our fallen. Just to give a little bit of background, the Council's Safety Advisory Group was asked to meet to provide advice and guidance for event planners. The group met on Monday, and I just want to stress that we did not want to come out with any official guidance, particularly as you will appreciate at the moment, we live in very fluid times in terms of restrictions. And the last thing we wanted to do was provide some guidance, which we then had to retract. And to a certain extent, we are still in that kind of area. So I hope community organisations, organisers, event planners will understand that position we're in, but we very much hope to create a dialogue where we can work together. So the advisory group met on Monday, and this comprises of Public Health, Greater Manchester Police, North West Ambulance Service, as well as council officers, and all agreed that Remembrance Sunday events, as normally they are held, would not be safe at this point. It then faces us with a challenge of how then we commemorate this day, and I want to reiterate that the council is committed to commemorating that day. The advice was that there should be no parades or gatherings given the number of cases in the borough, but the Deputy Director of Place is to write out on behalf of the group to all event planners in the borough to advise that their events cannot proceed as normal and to encourage virtual ceremonies. We will also be promoting the fact that services can be held following the guidance in church, and church services will be allowed to proceed. We are also very much encouraging that wreaths will still be laid, and we will be encouraging that wreaths from those organisations that we know will want to pay their respect be laid between the 8th and the 11th of November, and that we do where we can video the laying of those wreaths to produce a video that can then be to commemorate, which shows all those organisations, which can there be shared across numerous channels to show that we are praying and showing our concern and commemorating those that have fallen. So that is basically all we can say at the moment, Councillor Evans. I hope you can judge by my reply. It's something that I'm incredibly keen that we work together. Many groups I know, I think will hopefully come forms of innovation in ways that they can and their groups can lay the reeds and maybe say a few words that can be put on a video live stream that can then be formed into a video. But it is hugely important. I know how disappointed, but like you said, in my local war memorial at Dunsker, we can have up to 3,000 people attended, and that has been an incredibly emotional experience to show the overwhelming power of people coming together and commemorating. But the reality is those 3,000 are packed in like sardines in a very small area, and unfortunately it just can't happen in the way that we would normally want it to happen, and rejoice in it happening and be proud to come together and let it happen. So more information will be going out to event planners, but I can absolutely assure you the event will be marked as much as we can given the restrictions that we will be under. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader of Council. Councillor Donaghy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Council. As the coronavirus continues to proceed in the ascendancy, not only in our area, but across the country, following discussions last weekend, particularly in Greater Manchester, it was made very clear by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, that he would not surrender this area to hardship and privation as a result of the virus, whilst at the same time supporting measures to control it. Now, clearly, it's a very, very narrow tightrope to walk, but at the moment, and I pay credit to all leaders for this, they have tried to do their best for the area and not simply rolled over and accepted government diktat. So, following the recent statement by the President of the National Association of Head Teachers that some schools are being put under extreme budgetary pressures in implementing COVID-19 safety procedures and processes without any additional funding. Can the Executive Cabinet member tell the Council what is the position regarding Bolton schools and if they are being adversely affected financially? And if that is the case, will she join me in asking the Leader of the Council to secure additional funding from central government to help local schools cover any shortfall? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Donaghy. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Donaghy, for your question and for giving me the opportunity to let the Council know of the variety of substantial financial packages the government has made available to schools and early year settings to support them during the COVID pandemic. Our local authority has not received any feedback from schools reporting funding difficulties arising from COVID due to the comprehensive financial measures the government has provided. Schools have, of course, continued to receive their core funding from the Dedicated Schools Grant during their partial opening so that their financial commitments could be met as normal. The Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, which is a grant to help those employers whose operations have been affected adversely by COVID, has been accessed by our schools where they have lost income from providing leisure facilities and childcare. To date, they have accessed over £500,000 from this scheme. An exceptional cost fund was set up by the government to all schools to claim back for extra expenses directly related to COVID during the partial closure last academic year. This included the increased costs related to keeping the schools open during Easter and half-term, and also support for free school meals for children who weren't attending school, as well as during the holidays, and also, of course, for all the additional cleaning required to comply with the regulations relating to infection control. Our schools have submitted claims so far under this fund for over £500,000. This does not include claims made by academies. In recognition of the extra resources that will be needed by schools to help pupils make up the teaching time lost during the lockdown, the government has provided a £1 billion fund for this academic year. This is made up of, firstly, £650 million catch-up premium, payable to all schools in 3 tranches during the academic year. And it's calculated at £80 per pupil aged 4 to 16. And in recognition of the increased costs for children in special schools, they will be allocated £240 each. The schools have flexibility to spend this money on the best way to help their pupils catch up in their learning. And secondly, in this £1 billion fund, there is a £350 million national tutoring programme, which is designed to provide additional targeted support to the most disadvantaged and vulnerable children, which have most been hit by the disruption to their learning. And it will allow access to high quality subsidised tuition from approved tuition partners, which will start after this half term. So as you can see, Bolton schools have benefited from an array of financial packages from the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Galloway. Councillor Hornby.
Thank you, Madam members of the Council. This question that I am putting to the Leader of Council is purely intended to help our staff that work at the Town Hall, and in particular our senior staff that are coping with very difficult times as they are at the moment. So does the Leader of the Council agree with me that the 2022, the year that the Electoral Commission has given Bolton to form new ward boundaries and conduct an all-out election of all 60 members of the council, should be postponed to 2023, as it has done in some other authorities within Greater Manchester? Our senior officers and staff are working flat out at this moment in time to keep going as much of the council services as they can, and do not need this additional pressure at this time. And will he write to the Electoral Commission, and with signatures also from all other political leaders in this town, asking for Bolton to delay the boundary changes till 2023? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hornby. Councillor, Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Hornby, for the question. It is an important matter. We have, just as colleagues will know, parties and the council have submitted only in the last week our proposals for numbers or changes to numbers of the council number of councillors. And Councillor Hornby is absolutely right that 3 councils have already been granted an extra year to 2023 for their boundary, for their all-outs and fighting elections on different boundaries. 2 councils have been granted 2022, but they were councils that had already achieved their numbers, is my understanding, before the lockdown at the end of March. So they were ahead of the curve, and we are just at the stage where we are collecting and hearing about, we should be hearing the results of our numbers. I think it is the 20th of this month, and then soon after that, the 27th, is when submission dates start from when groups would put forward their suggested maps. I think he raises a hugely important point about capacity. I know the Chief Executive has written to the Commission asking for this consultation to be delayed until the new year because of the existing pressures on officers and members, and in anticipation of further restrictions being imposed on the northwest of England because of inevitably COVID-19. Not only is the pressure due to Bolton having a high infection rate in the country, but also due to the pandemic's impact on our budget. I'm also mindful of the other consultations which we're committed to carrying out, all of which begin before Christmas: the spatial framework, clean air and minimum licensing standards. And this will take up officer and member time. And there are also constrictions for public involvement due to limitations to access to public buildings and libraries due to COVID-19. And those of us that have been through this process before will know that the public engagement on this is can be quite intense. When you are talking of streets going into different areas under different definitions, the public get extremely involved in the process, and just as they should do, and it's right that they should do, we want them to engage. And clearly, if we have restrictions, that engagement is limited. And if there is not sufficient consultation, then of course we always would face the shadow of a judicial review. So my understanding is I will be recommending that a letter is going to the Commission asking for the all-out elections in 2023 rather than 2022, as there is uncertainty. This does not mean that any councillors who will be due for election will not be up for election. It will just mean the time that they serve will be different, because they could be up sooner or later due to an all-out. So I think it is a key thing, and I welcome Councillor Hornby's offer to jointly sign. I have spoken informally with many leaders on this subject, and I am very keen, if there is cross-party agreement, for as many leaders to sign that letter as possible. And so I thank Councillor Hornby for the question, and that's it, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader of Council. Councillor Hornby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hope this question does not embarrass you, Madam Mayor. It is not intended to do in any way, shape or form. But if you go back to 2006, when I first arrived on Bolton Council, you was my mentor when I first arrived. So we accept that this municipal year has been one which we will never forget, one that has brought many challenges and continues to do so. And our current mayor, Madam Mayor, has done the town very proud. Madam Mayor has had to learn many things over the past few months, from socially distanced engagements to chairing a virtual council meeting of 60 members, something which would be a challenge for anybody. In fact, we've learned a new phrase, which is "Councillor, you're on mute." I would ask that the council leader to see if it is possible for Madam Mayor's year in office to be extended for a further municipal year, in order that when things start to return to normal, she can have the mayoral year she quite rightly deserves from the many years of loyal, active service to our town. So I pose the question to the Leader of the Council. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hornby. Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I saw this question, I was convinced I'd answered it before somewhere, but it mustn't have been in full council. It must have been in another meeting. But I mean, my first, of course, Councillor Hornby is the answer. I think I have spoken informally to other leaders on this subject as well. And it is absolutely, we said at the beginning of the year when I spoke to the Mayor about it and the challenge that was facing the Mayor for the year. And we said, I think we were almost being optimistic then. We were talking about an inauguration in possibly October, November, or just into the new year. It's clear that it would be completely unfair to say to Councillor Thomas, Madam Mayor, that this is your year, that's it. And I am, delighted to propose, and I'm sure we would get overwhelming support from every councillor, that you are doing a stalwart job despite all the challenges you face during the year. But it is only right and proper that you have a year when you yourself take the limelight, take the centre stage as mayor, do what mayors have done before, go out, meet as many people as you can, promote the town, have an inauguration, all the things associated with it. And I would be happy to propose that you did another year and build on the success of this year that you've done with the challenges, but have a year that is a traditional year where you can enjoy your role, and of course the Mayor Consort as well, who I know will be being very careful at shielding, as I know is like me, has some underlying health conditions, so I know that he will be concerned and not be able to go about his duties as I'm sure he would love to in support of you. So I have great pleasure in proposing that you would do another year, and hopefully that year will be COVID free. Let's just hope and pray that's the case. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader of the Council. Chief Exec.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We do have a question under Standing Order 9(c) from Councillor Hayes, as shown on the order paper. Unfortunately, we have not received an answer. Councillor Hayes has kindly agreed that we can circulate the answer to all members once received. I anticipate the answer will be received by the end of the week. Madam Mayor, the next item of business is to deal with the minutes of the proceedings of the Licensing Committee.
Councillor Mrs Fairclough.
I'm coming. The minutes of the proceedings of the meeting of the Licensing and Environmental Regulation Committee held on the 8th of September 2020 be approved. I'll start with yes.
Councillor Dean.
Madam Mayor, I formally second.
Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
The motion is carried. Chief Exec.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The next item of business is to deal with the minutes of the proceedings of the scrutiny committees.
Councillor Sylvester.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I beg to formally move the minutes and proceedings of the following scrutiny committees. Corporate and External Issues Scrutiny Committee. The meeting was on the 24th of September 2020. Place Scrutiny Committee. The meeting was on the 25th of August 2020. Children's Services Scrutiny Committee. The meeting was on the 26th of August 2020. And Health Overview and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committees. Those meetings were on the 4th of August and the 29th of September 2020. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sylvester. Councillor Hornby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally rise to second those meetings. Thank you.
Are these agreed?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
I think the motion is carried. Chief Exec.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The next item of business is to deal with the minutes of the meetings of the area forums.
Councillor Muslim.
I move that the minutes of the meeting of the area forums be approved for the area forums held in 2019.
Leader of the Council.
I second that, Madam Mayor.
Are these agreed?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
The motion is carried. Chief Exec.
Madam Mayor, the next item of business is to consider a motion in the name of Councillor Hayes relating to changes to planning applications.
Councillor Hayes.
Madam Mayor, thank you. I'm pleased that we have this opportunity
to give our views on what would be the most significant changes to England's planning system since 1947 in the white paper that the government's put forward. If we had not, this council's response would have gone in before the 28th of October deadline without any debate. In the foreword to the white paper, the Prime Minister speaks of, quote, our outdated and ineffective planning system. He says that, quote, thanks to our planning system, we have nowhere near enough homes in the right places. He's repeating parrot fashion what the developers are claiming. He's just as wrong as they are. The idea that planning is a barrier to house building is a myth. 9 in 10 planning applications are approved by councils, while more than 1 million homes given permission in the last decade have not yet been built. Not my words, but those of James Jameson, the Conservative chair of the Local Government Association, who knows far more about the real situation than the Prime Minister does. It is not the lack of planning permission that prevents new homes being built, but the government's refusal to properly invest in affordable housing. The government should be announcing a huge house building programme of social homes for rent. Other useful actions it could take, but it isn't, is to allow councils to take powers, perhaps compulsory purchase, to free up sites that developers land bank. Strengthen councils' enforcement and sanction powers, give grants to help decontaminate brownfield sites in city centres, and restore some of the funding to local government, which has forced planning departments to cut staff. I'd like to briefly deal with some of the other proposals in the white paper that I find objectionable. Councils will lose the ability to set local policies. Instead of planning policy will be set nationally with local plans restricted to development allocation and the specific codes and standards to be applied to projects in the development sites. Section 106 will be scrapped. The new levy will be paid at the point of occupation, leaving councils to pay for and deliver any infrastructure needed up front. Does anybody really believe we have got enough money passed down from a national scheme? I don't. It would leave us very vulnerable. Rather than scrap Section 106, our powers under it should be strengthened. People may have read that Shelter have publicly stated that social housing could face extinction, their quotes, if the requirement for developers to build their fair share was removed. Their view may well be right. Government will also impose top-down housing targets on local authorities. A decade after, Eric Pickles scrapped them. This would be yet another power grab by central government and reduce local democracy and public accountability. It is also a charter for the developers based on a flawed presumption that the planning rules are preventing housing targets being met. No coincidence that the developers are a major contributor to the Conservative Party. I will end with another quote. The plans would amount to removing local democracy, cutting the number of affordable homes that will be built, and building over rural areas. Again, not my words, but those of former Prime Minister Theresa May MP. Madam Mayor, I have pleasure in moving this motion and hope for overwhelming support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Councillor Sylvester.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am very happy indeed to second this motion, and I can confirm that the Labour group will be voting in favour of the motion. As you will remember, Madam Mayor, I asked a question at the last meeting of the Council on this very subject, outlining why the Labour group is against these government proposals, and I also issued a press release to the Bolton News a number of weeks ago, which was then printed outlining the reasons why the Labour group are very concerned and against the government's proposals. I have to say that the wording of this motion is very similar to the press release which was carried by the Bolton News, so I must thank the Liberal group for supporting the Labour group in opposition to these government proposals. As I said at the last meeting of the Council, the Labour Group is backing calls from the Campaign to Protect Rural England, the Town and Country Planning Association and the Institute of Historic Building Conservation to keep decision making in planning local. I have also received representations from residents in my ward asking for the Labour Group to support the Wildlife Trust views that these government planning reform proposals would increase nature's decline, fail to integrate nature into people's lives and undermine the democratic process for local decision making. And I can confirm that the Labour Group also fully supports the Wildlife Trust views. Labour believes that the government's proposed reforms on the planning system are a developer's charter that will remove powers from elected local representatives and hand them to Whitehall appointed boards of developers, while doing nothing to solve the growing affordable housing crisis our country faces. These changes will lead to local people no longer having the ability to formally object to inappropriate developments in their own street or neighbourhood, with participation limited to consultation on the area's local plan every few years. Labour believes that the changes to permitted development pushed through by ministers before the summer recess will result in a new swathe of poor quality housing in our towns and cities, with empty shops turned into housing rather than brought back into use. The Conservative government wants to remove the voice of local people over planning applications. Labour opposes this attempt to prevent local people from formally objecting to inappropriate developments in their neighbourhood. Labour wants to see local people and their elected representatives given a bigger say over the developments of their neighbourhoods, not less. Changes to permitted development will allow neighbours to build towering extensions that overlook people's homes and gardens, block out light, invade privacy, and affect the look of the neighbourhood, with no say for others living locally. This white paper fundamentally misdiagnoses the reason that too few homes are being built and proposes no measures to force developers to use unimplemented planning permissions. There are almost 1 million new homes that have already had planning approval that have not been built. Labour opposes the increase in the threshold at which developers start to make contributions to local infrastructure and to build affordable housing, because it means less tax and higher profits for wealthy developers and less income for hard-pressed communities. We remain concerned that the government is removing existing funding streams for affordable housing with no clear plan on what will replace it. Labour believes that changes to permitted development rushed through by the Conservative government ahead of the summer recess are combined with the Planning for the Future white paper, a developer's charter, which will result in a new swathe of poor quality housing in our towns and cities. The changes will hand more power to big housing developers and remove the voice of the community for certain types of development, including the conversions of empty flats or shops into housing. These extensions to permitted development rights will turn high streets into ghost towns by allowing retail units to be converted into low quality flats so that shops can never return. Labour wants to fix our broken housing market with high quality, environmentally friendly, truly affordable homes for key workers, people on low incomes and others who badly need somewhere decent to live, net carbon zero, powered by renewable energy, well insulated, safe and secure. This white paper does little to address the urgent challenge of climate change, with no proposals to address energy efficiency of our climate goals more widely. Ministers should listen to a report they commissioned into the impact of permitted development homes, which concluded permitted development conversions do seem to create worse quality residential environments than planning permission conversions in relation to a number of factors widely linked to health, well-being and quality of life of future occupiers. For all of the reasons given, Madam Mayor, the Labour Group calls upon the Government to ditch their proposals, and we support the motion as on the order paper. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sylvester. The motion is now before the Council and open to debate. I have 4 speakers to date on this. The first one is Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I will be voting for the motion tonight, and there are some interesting points made within it, but I would say that reform of the current system is needed if we are, as a nation, to have any chance of creating the homes needed for the amount of people who wish to have a place to call their own. I would say to the members, however, that quoting figures out of the context of the individual sites in question and since 2009 and asserting that the granting of a planning application permission means it will automatically go ahead risks oversimplifying the conversation. Of course, as you will understand, viability and economic circumstance can change during the course of a project. A lot has changed since the legacy of the economic crash of 2009. So to infer from this that there are those who would say it is the fault of local authorities is a bit of a stretch. Also, I think, in contrast to the sentiments of sources quoted in the motion, you can find much support and comment of the white paper and its aims. For instance, the Federation of Master Builders said that the current planning system is a major barrier for small house builders, that the white paper will help bring the planning system into the 21st century through digitisation and simplification, and it's a victory for common sense. It seeks to engage with small to medium-sized SME house builders to ensure new systems work, and that this is key to increasing the volume and quality of new homes coming through. Just to talk about some of the points raised in the motion, growth areas will be set by local authorities via the local plan process, and that is for local authorities to agree and have a consultation and representation from local people. Adopting a local plan would set uses within a set of parameters for height and density, again for local authorities to decide. These growth, renewal and importantly protect areas are to be set again by local authorities and people. This means local people and elected representatives can have their say. Madam Mayor, the government has a mandate to create the conditions required for the homes people want. Reforms mean that valued green spaces will be protected for future generations by allowing for more building on brownfield land and all new streets to be tree lined. Much needed homes to be built quicker by ensuring local housing plans are developed and agreed in 30 months, and the planning system will be made more accessible by harnessing the latest technology through online maps and data. It's imperative to do this as the demographic changes we have seen, particularly since the turn of the 21st century, notably more inward migration, are certainly supported and indeed welcomed by a cosy consensus amongst some, and a sure sign, if it was ever needed, of the desirability of this nation to be a place for people to call home, and on average people living longer in the homes they already own, has caused the changes needed due to the pressures in the demands placed upon the system to keep up. This is a white paper and we've not seen the ultimate outcome yet. It's easy to call for opposition rather than create needed change, but we have to meet the challenges. So I can support the spirit of the motion to begin the discussion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Peel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, that was a bit of a surprise. A Conservative local councillor having a go at the government. Who would have thought it? Not seen that happen much recently. But I think I was very happy to work with councillors to ensure that this motion came to the front of the queue. Very happy to do that, because had we not been able to work together to do this, this council would not have had the opportunity to express its view at a meeting like this before the consultation ended. I'm not blaming anybody for that, but members who were at the last consultation meeting on the other planning changes will share my view that the entire event was rushed in a very haphazard way, basically giving members very little time to get their views back. And Councillor Hewitt chaired that meeting, and he chaired it quite well, but did feel the need to respond to each and every point that was made, which isn't really the point of a consultation, to listen to members' views. And Councillor Hayes has pushed this point for a long time, and it's something that the Labour group has also shared, and that is this ridiculous notion that this government's been doing since 2010, blaming local planning authorities for lack of house building or for the building industry not moving or growing fast enough. It's absolutely ridiculous. There's no evidence to it. As Councillor has said, what we actually need is direct government action in terms of land remediation, in terms of clearing brownfield sites, in terms of infrastructure, far more than what's actually on the paper at the moment, and investment into, I'll not say affordable housing, but investment into much needed social housing. And I will remind members that in the Labour Party's last two manifestos, there were quite radical proposals about dealing with land banking, whereby local authorities could pretty much take control of land that was brownfield land that was just lying vacant and not being developed. And there's some very good schemes on that. And I think it's things like that that government need to be looking at. Now, I was going to conclude by saying there's always been, and I'll be very kind to the Conservative Party here, there's always been quite a strong tradition amongst grassroots Tory councils across the country, which is quite independent or even rebellious against Conservative government plans that meddle with planning. We all know how Conservative councils absolutely love to be on planning committee. They line up to be on it, and so that kind of streak has always been there. So I half expected that there might have been some rigorous debate within the Bolton Tory group on this issue, and it seems there has. But also, I've got to say that there have been rumours in the national press over the last 24 hours of a government climb down on this. There have been rumours that some of the more controversial points of the planning white paper are actually going to be heavily watered down or scrapped completely. And that may also have something to do with Conservative councillors joining Labour and the Lib Dems in having a go at the government. And finally, I mean, let's face it, if the government do a massive U-turn on this planning white paper, who on earth is going to be surprised? Because this is now just part of the course, isn't it? Part of the course that this government just does U-turn after U-turn. They announce things in a big fanfare, start getting a bit of stick for it, and then do a U-turn. We welcome that U-turn. It needs to happen. It needs to happen very quickly. And let's put these put some of these ridiculous proposals to bed. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peel. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In answer to Councillor Hayes and Councillor Peel so far, don't be surprised at Conservative councillors taking a stand for the best interests of the residents of Bolton when it comes to something like this, similarly to the way we've stood out against our own government in the COVID debate and the restrictions that are being brought in. We are independent. I can assure you, Nick, Labour do not have a monopoly on this. I've spoken quite a lot in planning meetings, not as a planning councillor, but just as a ward councillor, about the need to actually ensure national minimum standards in house building, both in terms of space and social amenity, and not take part in this, what seems to be, from a developer's point of view, a race to the bottom to provide the minimum and concentrate everything on levels of insulation. People need decent housing to live in, of a decent size, something they can be proud of and something that they can invest in themselves. And I don't just mean that financially, I mean in the way that they look after it, the way that they get on with the neighbours and the way that they add or raise areas in which they live. So I'm happy to support this, again, with the Section 106 monies. I believe it would be a great loss. We need to invest in infrastructure around development, so I've no problem in supporting that. There is a shift, and a notable shift, again something I've talked on quite a lot recently, a move away since COVID, in actual fact, perhaps has accelerated this, a move away from the big ideas of building flats in town centres and other areas. People are now looking more to wanting actual housing with garden, looking at life work balances. So the actual type of properties that are being sought are perhaps moving back to what they were back in the 50s, when there was the large scale building of social housing, semis, etc. And I think that's the way we're going. Land banking, yes, an evil, undoubtedly. So don't be surprised that I and many other Conservative councillors are backing this motion. I'm happy to support this motion. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wish to support I wish to speak in support of the motion in raising concerns over the proposals contained in the White Paper Planning for the Future. These proposals are, of course, merely the basis for further consultation, which is going to go on until the end of this month. There is a need for some reform of the English planning system, as it's undoubtedly long, cumbersome and expensive, and it comes up with inconsistent decisions to the extent that it is only large-scale developers who have sufficiently deep pockets that dominate the house building in the UK, to the exclusion of small and medium-sized firms, and Councillor Hewitt referred to this. It is not efficient in delivering homes, and housing targets are not being met, despite the rise in annual household growth projections. Home ownership is declining, and the average age of the first-time homeowner has increased. However, my main concern with the proposals is how they will impact on the local people's voice in the planning process. The introduction of a local plan and a zonal planning system appears to be less democratic, and it reduces the rights and opportunities for communities to participate. There would be no more communities reacting to each planning application on a case-by-case basis and making representations to the elected members on council planning committees. And instead, the main engagement with the public would be at the initial plan making stage, whereby the local area is divided into the 3 zones, which each has its own planning system. So how communities will be encouraged to proactively participate in the local plan at this stage in greater numbers than they do at present with the individual planning applications is really not clear. There are proposals to make planning information, which is at present a morass of plans and drawings, more streamlined and easily accessible through digitalisation. So you can have real-time information, high-quality virtual simulations and standardisation of all the data. And this is all welcome. However, it is unlikely that this on its own will encourage a larger mix of people to participate. And also, you don't want to run the risk of excluding those who are not comfortable with technology. So the question is, will people really be satisfied with exchanging the ability to object to individual planning applications for engagement earlier on in the planning process, in the development of a local plan and the designation of zones? And I don't believe they will. A whole stage of public scrutiny, which we have at present, will be missed out. And I think the public will feel disenfranchised. And to have that right to stand up, to object and to be heard is something that is of great importance. And I think it would be remiss to remove this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Galloway. Councillor Newall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to speak about representation too in planning. As elected members, we represent our residents both at ward level with concerns and objections raised regarding planning applications and at borough level too if we sit on the planning committee. It's left to us to explain to angry and confused residents why their objections, which are so valid to them, do not count as they are not material considerations. I have only been on the planning committee for the last 4 years, but I have seen some big changes in how the views and concerns of residents can be registered by elected members. It used to be that if a councillor wanted an application to be heard at committee, a request was enough. Now we have to give a reason why, And this, of course, has implications on the type of representation that can be expected by residents. We have all seen planning meetings where residents have turned up in great numbers, desperate for the committee to support their objections and refuse an application, and watch their disappointment and anger when large developments are approved, knowing the distress and turmoil that the development will cause to both people and the environment. The applications are approved, of course, because the objection of sometimes hundreds of people on the grounds that developments will destroy their present lifestyle and peace of mind is just not valid. It's not a material consideration, which begs the question, just who do we build these developments for? Do we build them for local people and communities, or do we build them for the benefit of developments? Cui bono, as they say, who benefits? If the planning committee is made up of elected members and cannot successfully register the views of the electorate, well, who can? Planning for the Future is the consultation document outlining the changes that are planned. It starts by saying that planning decisions at present are discretionary and undertaken on a case-by-case basis, as if this is a bad thing. It also laments the fact that 36% of major applications and 30% of minor applications are overturned. Surely this demonstrates that the present situation allows for mistakes to be rectified and discretion to be exercised when dealing with issues that affect many of our residents. In the document, the emphasis is on minimising the risk for developers, minimising the cost for developers, and maximising ease of access to land by developers. It is a developer's charter from a government who are far too friendly with their donor friends in property development, as the Minister has demonstrated on several occasions recently. Areas zoned for growth will automatically secure outline approval. Where is the local right to debate that? And who decides on the zones? Areas designated for renewal are, and I quote, suitable for gentle densification. I have to admit, I had to look up what densification means, and it is the act of or process of becoming dense, or to increase density of people living in urban areas. It also says, and this is a quote, we will streamline the opportunity for consultation at the planning application stage because this adds delay to the process and allows a small minority of voices, some from the local area and often some not, to shape outcomes. We can't have that, can we? Areas zoned for renewal will also have a presumption in favour of development. And at the moment, as has just been said, the public have two chances to be involved when the local plan is made and when the application is submitted. The new proposals mean that the second part of this opportunity to be heard will, in many cases, be removed. The Planning for the Future consultation calls for a 21st century streamlined approach to planning, and some of what is proposed has merit, but we must not allow our right to be heard to be diminished. Tomorrow, at Planning Committee, we will hear applications, and some will have many objections from residents who feel that the application affects their lives adversely. It is our duty to make sure that their voice is heard, and this top-down authoritarian approach to planning must be resisted. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Newell. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, for the avoidance of doubt, I will say at the outset I will be supporting this motion, and I do so because I don't think there's any member of this council who would have to say that the planning process has not got its faults, but equally needs to have the checks and balances in place. And I start from that very simple premise. And clearly, to argue for the local voice to be heard is important. But what the paper proposes, it's a bit like a curate's egg, isn't it? It's good in parts. And it's good in the sense that by creating the local plans with greater local involvement, and we've had enough examples of that in the last few months with the spatial framework, I have never known a consultation that's on planning matters has actually evoked such strong representations and comments across the whole of the conurbation. And therefore we've got experience of that. The emphasis placed in the white paper on local plans, I think, is to be welcomed. Equally to be welcomed is the emphasis placed on local plans designating brownfield sites as being the preferable and the premier development areas. But it's interesting that this government, only in the last few months, has put £81 million into Greater Manchester for brownfield site redemption and remediation. So there is a clear commitment from the government to see brownfield and urban sites developed prior to and well before any encroachment on greenbelt and greenfield sites. So let's recognise that zonal planning has actually got a lot to commend it in taking the heat out of that situation by putting the emphasis on the brownfield opportunities. And that's what consultation is about. A white paper, at the end of the day, from time immemorial, white papers are part of a consultation process. I can't think of many pieces of legislation that have not been substantially changed between the publication of a green paper, a white paper, and the final piece of legislation. And it's a bit like our PDG process. It's the opportunity for members and the public to have their say on what is good or what is bad, in their view, in the consultation and the white paper. And this is the opportunity that members have. When we talk, as some members have done tonight, about the Section 106 position, I've got a wry smile, because how often in committee have we put in place a 106 agreement which has subsequently been appealed by the developer as being non-deliverable? How often in committee have we argued that what is proposed in the 106 doesn't go far enough, isn't adequate, and needs to be more robustly promoted? I would hope that in the consultation we make very clear and very strong representations that the infrastructure levy has got to be sufficiently robust to do the things. Yes, it may need some interim bridging finance to see it through, but to make sure we've got the resources protected and assured to ensure that the infrastructure and the 106 or the new 106 are properly delivered. I see local plans as being a great opportunity for the public to become engaged and involved. It will take then the pressure and the heat out of members focusing wholly on the merits of a particular application, because the principle will have already been debated and discussed. That must surely be an improvement. So the thrust for brownfield development, the thrust to ensure that there is adequate infrastructure funding in place, the thrust to ensure that local plans form an important part of that planning process, I think are huge merits and huge gains from this white paper. Yes, there are defects. Yes, there are issues that need to be addressed. But this is the opportunity, not just through this meeting, but for members generally, have any input into that and to convince members of Parliament and the government of the need for those improvements, that the tweaking, the changes are necessary to deliver what we're all speaking tonight. I think everybody who's spoken tonight in this debate has had a similar thrust to it, that there needs to be a reform in planning process. This is now the time. Madam Mayor, I will be supporting, as I said at the outset, I urge members to do so.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Brady.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would be supporting this and would thank Councillor Hayes for bringing this motion. However, I would remind Councillor Sylvester that the Labour group opposed the motion I brought to Horwich Town Council back in 2015 for a Horwich neighbourhood plan, and that would have brought planning right back to a truly local level. But for that opposition, the neighbourhood plan would now be in place and offer Horwich protection from inappropriate and unwanted development. The neighbourhood plan is now delayed due to COVID, with no referendum possible. So very disappointing to see this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brady. Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's been said the Conservative group will be supporting this motion tonight. We have got concerns about the white paper. It's been pointed out by my colleagues. It is only a white paper and out for consultation, and I'm very surprised, as Councillor Peel alluded to earlier on, if there weren't some considerable changes made to it. Councillor Hayes quoted James Jamieson, Conservative chair of the LGA, cross-party, huge concerns there. I'm on a WhatsApp group with Conservative leaders across the country, and I can assure him that the monopoly of concern on the white paper is not solely with the Liberals and the Labour groups. So I'm always reminded when motions of this type come forward of my former colleague, Councillor Critchley, who, had he still been on the council, would have undoubtedly had a incredibly strong view on this. And we, as local Conservatives, have always, and I know that just in my time as leader, have answered numerous questions from Councillor Donaghy about local autonomy. And I probably, in my 14 years on the council, I've only probably served about 2 years on planning, but during that time one recognises the huge importance of local decision making, and the process is not flawless, and I'm sure the process could be somewhat improved. For example, I've sat on licensing for the majority of my tenure as a councillor, no longer, sadly, with other duties, but for the majority. And there was much more of an acceptance in licensing of the criteria by which you could take action. And I think planning, because of its nature, because of its involvement with the public, becomes far more emotive, and often reasons are given that are not always correct conditions or correct reasons but still members feel the need to stand up and fight. Quite rightly, it's done from the best place, fight for their residents. So I reiterate what the mantra that I've always had, that we should always have local determination, and any easing which gives extra delegation and we lose autonomy, but extra delegation to the centre is going very much in the wrong direction. So the group tonight will be supporting the motion, and happy to do so, and happy to flag up our concerns over the white paper. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Greenosh. Councillor Hornby.
Thank you, Madam members of this council. As a former chairman of planning from 2007 to 2009, I think it's imperative that I say just a few words. I'm not going to reiterate what everybody said, but I think it's worth supporting just for the pure fact that this is the first time ever I have known Councillor Walsh disagree with his own government. So for that reason alone, I think it is worth supporting this motion tonight. Section 106 monies is something that is very, very important, And as it has already been said, there are so many applications that come before this committee that the developer comes back and says, I'm sorry, I can't afford to do that, but I'm sorry, you know the risks when you buy the land, you know what it's going to cost you to do it. Stop trying to put one over on us. And the fact is that if we allow these recommendations in this white paper to go through, it makes it far easier for the developers to do that. Planning committee is very, very important. It is made up of representation across our council chamber and across this borough. We've all got applications within our ward that are very, very important. I remember in particular Darcy Lever railway cutting, which I'm sure plenty of members of this committee will remember that have sat on planning for many, many years. So it is paramount that ward councillors have their say. So I am more than happy to support this motion tonight, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hornby. Councillor Hayes, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a few points. Well, who'd have thought it? It's almost like Aston Villa's game the other day against Manchester City, isn't it? The underdogs actually getting almost unanimous support, hopefully. I've got to say it's been a very good debate. There's been some very good points made. I, for one, would never pretend that the system doesn't need some change. Definitely it does. But it's a system that's already biased very heavily in favour of the applicant and the developer. And what we mustn't do, I believe, is skew it even more that way. Councillor Hewitt made some good points, but he also mentioned the Federation of Master Builders, hardly an unbiased organisation. Yes, they probably would support these proposals, but we do need to do something very much with brownfield sites and giving the councils more power to force these sites to be developed or enable them to be developed. That's the way I think we want to go. So, Madam Mayor, I'd like to thank all members for what appears to be almost unanimous support, and hope that we can encourage our members of Parliament. And Chris Green now seems to have got almost an appetite for rebellion, or is it self-preservation? I'm not quite sure which. And I'm sure he may well now be prepared, now he's lost his role as a very junior minister, to actually tell the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State what he thinks of this. Let's hope so anyway. Madam Mayor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. The Chief Executive will now take a named vote.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, councillors, here we start. Councillor Baines.
For.
Councillor Connor.
For.
Councillor Cox.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Fairclough.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Galloway.
For.
Councillor Greenhouse.
For.
Councillor Haslam.
For.
Councillor Hewitt.
For.
Councillor Muslim.
For.
Councillor Parkinson.
For.
Councillor Radcliffe.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Warren.
For.
Councillor Wild.
For.
Councillor Abdullah.
For.
Councillor Adia.
For.
Councillor Ayub.
For.
Councillor Donaghy.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Howarth.
For.
Councillor Ibrahim. Councillor Ibrahim. Are you muted? We'll come back to you, Councillor Ibrahim. Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Iqbal. We'll come back to you, Councillor Iqbal, just at the end. Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Thank you very much. Councillor Karam.
For.
Councillor McKeon.
For.
Councillor Mistry.
For.
Councillor Murray.
For.
Councillor Peel.
For.
Councillor Sherrington.
For.
Councillor Sylvester.
For.
Councillor Thomas. Yeah, that should come. That should be off. Thank you. Ignore that, but thank you. Councillor Zaman.
For.
Councillor Bagnall.
For.
Councillor Exley Fallon.
For.
Councillor Hayes.
For.
Councillor McGeehan.
For.
Councillor Newell.
For.
Councillor Beavers.
For.
Councillor Flitcroft.
For.
Councillor Pattison.
For.
Councillor Sanders.
For.
Councillor Weatherby.
4.
Councillor Darvish.
4.
Councillor Ishmael.
4.
Councillor Brady.
4.
Councillor Wright.
4.
Councillor Heslop.
4.
Councillor Watters. Councillor Watters. Are you muted, Councillor Watters? I'll come back one more time. Councillor Gibbon.
4.
Councillor Hornby.
4.
Councillor Allen.
4.
Councillor Bullock.
4.
Councillor Cunliffe.
4.
And just 2 councillors. I'm going to try one more time. Councillor Watters. No. Councillor Ibrahim.
4.
Hang on 1 second. Okay, thank you, Councillor Ibrahim. Just 1 second, councillors. Right, okay. Thank you, councillors. The motion is carried. Madam Mayor, the next item of business is to consider a motion in the name of Councillor Sylvester relating to the Building Safety Fund.
Councillor Sylvester.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. It is over 3 years since the terrible scenes of the Grenfell Tower disaster in London. The country was left in a state of shock at what unfolded and the aftermath. Government funding committed towards the remediation of high-rise residential buildings in the social and private sector that have unsafe aluminium composite ACM cladding has so far fallen way short and by a long way in making sure that the scenes which occurred at Grenfell do not happen elsewhere. A few months ago in May, the government published a registration prospectus for certain types of high-rise buildings, 18 metres high and over, but excluded any remediation help for high-rise hotels, student accommodation and build-to-let blocks, as well as buildings below 18 metres. The Cube building in Bolton Town Centre, which suffered its own fire late last year, is excluded from remediation funding as it is classed as student accommodation. The Labour group find this absolutely ridiculous and a prime example of why remediation funding should be increased and the criteria widened so that it and all at-risk buildings, regardless of height and status, can be covered. And we believe that retrospective payments should also be made where work has already been carried out. Unless this is done, then the majority of buildings affected with such cladding will be left without any financial support. The independent expert advisory panel of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government have stated that the most dangerous forms of ACM cladding are unsafe on buildings of any height, and that risks are increased in buildings with elderly and vulnerable residents. The advisory panel estimates there to be around 85,000 buildings in England between 11 and 18 metres high. Surely it is also common sense to include remediation funding to resolve any additional fire safety defects, as well as external cladding, and to introduce a complete ban on combustible cladding on all buildings, regardless of height. The Labour group has put this motion forward because we are seriously concerned that the government in the past 3 years has not done enough and has been slow to act to make sure that such tragic events like Grenfell do not occur again. Madam Mayor, I move the motion as on the order paper.
Thank you, Councillor Sylvester. Councillor Hayes.
Madam Mayor, if I can be heard but not seen, I'm happy to second the motion and reserve the right to speak. Thank you.
Yes, we did hear you, Councillor Hayes. The motion is now before Council and open to debate. Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Council. I think we can back calls as laid out in the motion, but I think it is useful to talk about some context to this issue mentioned in the preamble. It talks about the Grenfell building and the Cube as if to try and link the two categories of building together. Materially, technically, specifically, they are not the same. However, even though they are different systems, different styles of building, they are covered by the new announcement of funds by the government. We live in a free and democratic society where lessons can be learned in an open and transparent way if dangerous occurrences take place. This is important to remember, as others around the world do not have these freedoms. When incidents of this nature take place, it is right and proper a full investigation takes place, an evidence base is developed, and root cause analysis carried out to investigate the issues at hand. To act otherwise would be delusional. But it is right to recognise that as lessons are learned, only then can properly proportionate action be taken. The government's response has been good in bringing forward funds to mitigate and make safe buildings affected in these ways. The £600 million announced by the Conservative government in response to these findings for ACM, aluminium composite material cladding, which tackles the legacy of those types of systems, often initially installed to meet environmental concerns and energy efficiency targets in vogue, and the regulation at the forefront of thinking from the middle 2000s was the first wave. A following wave, which includes a further £1 billion put aside by the Conservative government for other non-ACM clad buildings, is a further commitment to correcting these legacy issues. This is covering other systems such as HPL, high pressure laminate, which was in use at the Cube. But throughout this process, the government has placed emphasis on building owners to come forward and do their part. It is building owners' responsibility first and foremost to ensure that their buildings are up to standards. That is where responsibility must fall primarily. Of course, as we have seen, where regulations change to take account of the findings of incident inquiries, this puts immense pressure on industry in terms of capacity to physically do the work in remediation. And this type of work is both complex and must be done right first time and should not be rushed. The new Building Safety Fund has been announced to make safe buildings in use now and with a legacy of dangerous cladding from previous years, giving a priority to social housing. Within the government's review of the ban on the use of combustible materials in and on the external walls of buildings, including attachments, a technical consultation paper, it is noted that there is no robust scientific evidence to support greater fire risks above certain heights, but says that it could be similar beyond the thresholds in question, and it has commissioned further research into the matter and recommends a reduction in height threshold in the interim, and requests and welcomes further evidence-based views on reducing the height threshold of the ban further. The government is asking that building owners do the right thing on this and bring up the standards of their buildings. In the meantime, this new money will do a great deal to make sure that buildings affected by this, where works to mitigate damage have not already begun, are made safe for their residents. The packages of support means that this government has now committed over £1.6 billion of support to further those aims and encourages owners to play their part. Industry and companies which have the expertise to carry out these types of work, sound notes of caution and ask for pragmatism concerning drawing up regulations, and this is the approach the government is taking. There's been a danger from some quarters to attempt to overly politicise a response to these legacy issues, and this should be resisted and pragmatic solutions sought for this issue. With regards to the Cube, the lessons learned are ongoing. In discussions with officers, the cladding used was a HPL high pressure laminate, different from ACM style, but this type of cladding qualifies for the support package in residential properties over 18 metres. The Cube was constructed in 2 blocks, and Block A fronting Bradford does in fact have a floor above 18 and therefore eligible for funding. Block B to the rear may also be considered to fall within the tolerance which is detailed within the prospectus, but that is for the owner and developer to make their own inquiries, as the scheme is not administered by the local authority. But it is important to note that as the GM Fire and Rescue Service, the Cube Fire Incident Report states in reviewing incidents of this nature, that there are significant fire risks from shortcomings in buildings constructions which are not solely dependent on height, so it is important not to solely focus on just height matters. In summary, Madam Mayor, and speaking of the Cube, it gives me an opportunity to put on the record again thanks I have for the remarkable work this council did working with other key stakeholders such as the university and voluntary groups, and of course in the initial stages the key worker responders and emergency services to look after the needs of those affected. This authority delivered a package of financial aid to those affected in much the same way we have delivered over £60 million of local business support during COVID-19, quickly and based on the needs of those to ensure that those affected had the support they needed. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Newall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As well as the residents who find themselves in danger in fires, I think it's only right that we consider the views of that group of people who actually run towards danger, the source of danger, when everybody else is running the other way. And by that, of course, I mean the fire service. The Fire Brigade Union called for a universal ban on combustible cladding, but the Westminster Government continues to allow cladding of limited combustibility for any building works in the future. Matt Rack, who is the General Secretary of the FBU, said, "These measures do not deal with the existing cladding on nearly 500 buildings across England where people live and work every day." The FBU believe that although the government's proposals only apply to buildings over 18 metres high, plus hospitals and care homes, which is roughly 6 stories, they should apply to all buildings, whatever their height and use. But the government continued to allow the use of A2 materials when they should permit only the highest standard of A1 materials. A1 materials have no contribution to fire at any stage, for example, stone and glass. A2 materials have no significant contribution, for example, plasterboard. Matt Rack also said, "Fire authorities and local councils need to be fully funded to carry out fire inspections now and in the future. The government must change the law to ensure that firefighters and tenants are consulted on safety matters in the home." The FBU also say that the government must fund a national independent programme of research into building materials and also implement government-run testing regimes for materials. And for the sake of balance, I'll finish with a quote from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and it's in the Q&A section on their website. And they say, "Some buildings may have specific concerns below 18 metres. What is important is the life risk, even in buildings of 1 to 3 floors, i.e. care homes. We must be guided by fact, not rhetoric from ministers, and we must listen to the experts. Nobody knows more about fire and risk than the fire service." Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Newall. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To be honest, Councillor Hewitt has sort of said a lot of what I was going to say anyway, but I'd just like to add into the mix here that I think a great responsibility lies on developers, architects, building regulations, inspectors for... Sorry, Madam Mayor, can you hear me?
I'm just saying that your camera isn't on, Councillor Cunningham, so that's why it's still on me. So if you want to put your camera on.
Yeah, it was switched on. It may not be working for some reason. It's switched on again now.
There we are, we can see now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, so as I was saying, Councillor Hewitt covered most of the points I was going to, but I do believe that there is a lot of emphasis needs to be put on to developers, architects, building regulations inspectors, because I think even back in the on the Grenfell Tower, the cladding that was used there, it was stated quite clearly on the even on the wrapping that came into, that it was only acceptable to a very low height, yet it was used extensively. So people ignored the actual restrictions and regulations, whether it was for profit or whether it was simply, I don't know, because of its insulation properties. I know, you know, whatever the reasons they came up with, if they'd actually used the correct material for the job, then things may have been different. And looking at the buildings that have problems now, where thankfully there hasn't been any fires as yet, you need to look very, very carefully at recovering money to make corrections from the people who actually use this stuff or specified it. We've got to tighten up on the whole process so that materials are only used where suitable. That's the last bit that I was going to add into what I was originally going to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Peel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Back in July, when we first put this motion in, I had the privilege of hosting a video roundtable discussion on this issue. We had senior Labour shadow ministers who joined us to listen firsthand at the experiences of students who were actually at the Cube at the time of the fire. And we're also joined by other residents of Bolton who live in high-rise buildings that aren't covered by this fund. The first thing I want to say is obviously to echo what's been said already, the tremendous appreciation and admiration that we have for our fire service, who responded in such a magnificent way to what could have been a tragedy, and thank God it wasn't. But the stories that we heard on that roundtable discussion were quite heartrending, and we realised early on in the discussion that the issue of fire safety is just one aspect of some very shoddy practices that go on with some building owners. There is, Madam Mayor, a much bigger issue looming in the background of the consequences of quite a weak regulatory system, where unscrupulous landlords can and often do put people's lives in danger. But let me just focus on the good and decent building owners for a moment, and let me highlight one of the biggest injustices in this building fund prospectus, because Councillor Hewitt said the government response has been good. Well, in many respects, the government response has been quite haphazard and illogical, because the fact is that if responsible building owners had already taken it upon themselves to act quickly and remove the cladding, they were not eligible for the fund. Now, what a ridiculous and unfair way the government has behaved there, actually penalising those decent building owners who acted in the interest of their residents. That is illogical to me. And Madam Mayor, this is just one aspect of the ask that our online petition from Bolton Labour Group is campaigning for, but there are many other details in the body of the report, such as the equally ridiculous rule that the fund is to be spent on a first come, first served basis. There's absolutely no logic to do it like that. And this is presumably in response to the damning National Audit Report that heavily criticised the huge underspend of the original ATM cladding fund. The cross-party select committee has also criticised the arbitrary rules that have been scrawled up seemingly in a rush that are being applied to this fund. Now, Madam Mayor, I normally I listen to Councillor Hewitt with great interest when he speaks on these matters. It is his portfolio after all, and he is usually very well briefed, but I was amazed that he's just said to council that the Cube is covered by the fund. The Cube is not covered by the fund, Councillor Hewitt. The Cube isn't covered by the fund because it's purpose-built student accommodation. Purpose-built student accommodation was taken out. In fact, it wasn't taken out. It was never included in the fund. Now, I appreciate you can't be an expert on everything, but if you've been briefed correctly, I presume you will go back to the officers and find out why you have been misinformed on that issue, because it's incredibly important that the Cube, where Boris Johnson stood outside during the election for a photo opportunity, is not included in this fund. Now, Madam Mayor, I take delight in yet another apparent U-turn from our beleaguered Prime Minister this afternoon. When he was asked a question from a Labour MP about this fund, he did seem to indicate that is prepared to look again at the 18 metres limit. That would be very welcome if he does it. Not all U-turns from this government are bad. Some U-turns are very much welcome. So I do hope that the Conservative group, Councillor Hewitt and Cunningham seem to indicate the supporting the motion. I do hope they support the motion and invite them and all members of the council to sign the Bolton Labour Group online petition. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peel. That's everyone who's indicated that wishes to speak. Councillor Hayes, do you wish to speak now?
Just waiting for the camera, madam.
Councillor Hayes, I do apologise, but your camera doesn't appear to be coming on. Would you like to speak anyway? We can hear you.
Yes, it is on, but there we are. We've got problems.
Sorry
Madam Mayor.
about
Thank
that.
you.
Sorry.
I think there's certain events in your lifetime that live with you because you may see them on television and realise that people are dying while you're watching the pictures. Grenfell doesn't come to the level of the Twin Towers and doesn't come to the level of Hillsborough. More people died there, but it does live in the memory of anybody who saw it as a horrible tragedy. And it's the sort of thing, there's so much public emotion that any government must look very sympathetically at trying to sort out the problems as quickly as they can. It is good that the government puts the money forward. It is correct to say that the prime responsibility must lie with the residents, the owners of the buildings. But where there's a building that people are sleeping in and they are having nightmares about whether they're in safety, it's imperative that we do something quickly. That I'm very happy to be seconding this motion for those very reasons. Student accommodation should be included, and there shouldn't be an absolute height limit on where we can include it. So I'm very happy to second Councillor Sylvester's motion and urge my group to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. We did hear everything you said. Councillor Sylvester, do you wish to use your right of reply?
I do, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I do wish to use my right of reply. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of the emergency services for their work with regards to the Cube fire on the day and afterwards, and to the University of Bolton for rehousing the students who were affected. I just want to thank Councillor Hayes for seconding the motion. It is the Labour Group's understanding, and I wish to echo what Councillor Peel said, that the Cube fire, the Cube building is not included in the funding pot from the government. Now, if this motion is passed tonight, and I don't see any reason why anybody should vote against it, this motion calls upon the government to increase the funding pot and widen the criteria so that all at-risk buildings can be covered, including retrospective payments where work has already been carried out, include the remediation of additional fire safety defects as well as external cladding, and introduce a complete ban on combustible cladding on all buildings regardless of height. I don't see any reason why any member of the council would vote against those words, so I'm sure that every member of the council will be supporting this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sylvester. The Chief Executive will now take a named vote.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, I'll call out the name of the councillors for the vote. Councillor Baines.
For.
Councillor Connor.
4.
Councillor Cox.
4.
Councillor Cunningham.
4.
Councillor Dean.
4.
Councillor Fairclough.
4.
Councillor Fletcher.
4.
Councillor Galloway.
4.
Councillor Greenhalgh.
4.
Councillor Haslam.
4.
Councillor Hewitt.
4.
Councillor Muslim.
4.
Councillor Parkinson.
4.
Councillor Radcliffe.
4.
Councillor Walsh.
4.
Councillor Warren.
4.
Councillor Wild.
4.
Councillor Abdullah.
4.
Councillor Adia.
4.
Councillor Ayub. Councillor Ayub. We'll come back to you, Councillor Ayub. Councillor Donaghy.
4.
Councillor Evans.
4.
Councillor Howarth.
4.
Councillor Ibrahim.
4.
Councillor Iqbal.
4.
Councillor Karam.
4.
Councillor McKeon.
4.
Councillor Mistry.
4.
Councillor Murray.
4.
Councillor Peel.
4.
Councillor Sherrington.
4.
Councillor Sylvester.
4.
Councillor Zaman.
4.
And I'll go back to Councillor Ayub for another try. Councillor Ayub. Okay, I'm going to move on. Councillor Bagnall.
4.
Councillor Eckersley Fallon.
4.
Councillor Hayes.
4.
Councillor McGeehan.
4.
Councillor Newell.
4.
Councillor Beavers.
4.
Councillor Flitcroft.
4.
Councillor Patterson.
4.
Councillor Sanders.
4.
Councillor Weatherby.
4.
Councillor Darvish.
4.
Councillor Ishmael.
4.
Councillor Brady.
4.
Councillor Wright.
4.
Councillor Heslop.
4.
Councillor Waters.
4.
Councillor Gibbon.
4.
Councillor Hornby.
4.
Councillor Allen.
4.
Councillor Bullock. Councillor Bullock. I'm going to move on. Councillor Cunliffe.
4.
Thank you. The motion is carried. Madam Mayor, the next item of business is to consider a motion in the name of Councillor Peel relating to the neighbourhood management funding.
Councillor Peel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, we finally, at long last, got to this motion. I think it's been bobbing around on the order paper since around last February. But the serious point is that this issue is not going to go away. Neighbourhood management, as a very important principle for this council, is not going to go away. So despite it now being nearly a year since the Tory council scrapped neighbourhood management and targeted funding at areas of deprivation, this motion is still as relevant now as it was then. We're asking the council to still condemn the decision by the cabinet in January 19, to still continue to note that parts of the decision by cabinet was to ignore serious concerns outlined in the equality impact assessment, to still further condemn the fact that the decision was made by a minority Conservative administration against the wishes of the overwhelming majority of councillors, and to therefore now take this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to the principle of narrowing the gap. Now, it's not just me and the Labour group saying this, but councillors from other parties have told the Tory administration quite clearly at every opportunity that they were wrong and that they should not have gone ahead with scrapping targeted funding at deprivation. Councillor Hayes, who can speak for himself, also warned them, although he probably didn't go as far as he perhaps could have done. He warned them that the Tories had no mandate to do this and were putting their own position at risk, because at the council meeting last November, Labour and 3 other groups, as it was at that time in this chamber, making up the majority of the councillors, sent the Tories a clear message, an instruction if you like, not to proceed. They were told you have no mandate, and yet they persisted. They took it back to Cabinet, ignored the instruction from Council and confirmed their decision. The minority Tory Cabinet pushed through what can only be described as a disgraceful attack on the most vulnerable in our society, and showed no concern for the damage this would cause. And there's only one way to describe that decision, and that is arrogant. Because any reasonable person would have thought that the Tories would acknowledge they have no mandate, especially for implementing things that were not contained within their 25-point plan. They didn't tell F&K that they were going to rob Farmouth blind, did they? They didn't listen to F&K when that group asked them not to do it, did they? They didn't listen, they didn't consult with them, they just did it. And so I hope some in the minority parties are now beginning to wake up and smell the deception. Madam Mayor, at the time of this motion, I understood that the Tory group's hostility to all party PDGs and engaging with backbenchers in meaningful policy discussions might well make the passing of this motion an irrelevance, because their version of PDGs, if you remember, was to change the policy and then hold a PDG or a review after they changed it, because that was their approach on neighbourhood management. And it wasn't so much that they got it wrong, rather they hoodwinked the council, including their allies, in the most disrespectful way. However, now we've seen the Tories finally accept our arguments and that we've been making since they've took over, and they've now restarted the PDG process, so we live in hope. Part of me also thinks that they could quite easily have sabotaged this delayed motion by holding the review already, but they haven't done it. After making commitments at full council last November and then repeating it in January 20 to hold a full review of neighbourhood management, months and months and months down the line, they still haven't done it. And it's nothing to do with capacity or fighting the pandemic, because they found time to organise a PDG to look at punitive charges for lost and damaged bins. They haven't found time to do this, so I think it's pretty much a case of it disinterests them. It doesn't capture their imagination to actually get this review or PDG process going. So now, Madam Mayor, we are in the position of the council issuing yet again, I do think this will go through, yet again very strong advice to this cabinet to stop hitting the most disadvantaged in our society. Having failed to make them see sense last time, we're now saying to them, right, the argument's now moved on, we accept that, but we insist you do the following. Stop messing around, get the review sorted out as quickly as possible, and number 2, whether you like it or not, the majority in this council who told you not to scrap targeted funding in the first place is now saying that the review needs to have at its centre the principle of narrowing the gap by targeting funding at geographical areas of highest deprivation. Madam Mayor, to conclude, the purpose of this motion is to try to achieve some progress. This motion attempts to again give a clear indication to the Cabinet that not only do we want this long-awaited review of neighbourhood management to happen, but we also wish to set clear parameters on the principle of narrowing the gap, so that the council can demonstrate to this minority administration that its ideologically inspired approach will have no truck in this council. I urge all members to support the motion, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peel. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally second the motion and I reserve the right to speak.
The motion is before council. I'll open it to debate. Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members. There are nonsense arguments from Conservatives that because you did not like some of the neighbourhood management work done by Labour, you weren't going to have neighbourhood management anymore. Was it really the reason anyway? I accuse you of smoke and mirrors. You chose to ignore the policy of neighbourhood management because you wanted early on in your administration to put more local funding into the wards that benefited, like Heaton and Lostock and Bromley Cross. We now need to persuade the Cabinet ahead of the PDG. You can't give every child in Bolton the chance of a good life if you are not using equity on resource allocation, because some neighbourhoods simply need more help to give every child the best start in life. You rapidly binned any notion of the local environment being a part of monies that make a difference in council wards where there is hardship, the knowledge base of England's indices of deprivation. When this has been debated, Conservative councillors were clear that environment public realm ought not to be part of a neighbourhood management targeted funding approach. Well, I've checked the council documents back to, I think it was 2006, and it was in the section cleaner, greener, safer, so it was there. There are 8 domains to the important Parliament approved indices of deprivation used to guide decision makers on spending public money in local authorities to improve lives. Domain 8 is the living environment. It beggars belief that the Conservative administration just swiped the 8th domain off the table in Bolton in a council that in its vision statement wants to narrow the gap and drive down health inequalities. You know, it reminds us of that old adage. Conservative philosophy is that nothing should stand in the way of wealthier people getting more and wealthy people getting richer. I remember when we heard early in your administration that one of the Conservative wards was providing a community Christmas tree purchased with that area funding money. That's what I heard. I said, why is that ward needing a state-funded Christmas tree? There's plenty of large properties with beautiful privets and large trees on the edge of front gardens. Why can't the community share enjoyment of a big garden tree decorated at the roadside? Conservatives have bemoaned the deprivation data, saying that under the lower super output areas, smaller areas of poverty are not captured. Well, it works both ways, and it's important to understand that. The indices of deprivation do have a measure for sensitivity. If you try and tweak in Bolton at pockets of poverty, some will surely be in wards already qualifying for neighbourhood management. The Hoff, for example, has HMOs and flats an area, along with detached houses in an area. There is one example. Last time we debated neighbourhood management, Councillor Greenouch stated that all of the wards have people with need and with social problems. The evidence shows us stark differences, Leader. The suicide data in Bolton shows 2/3 in the deprived wards. The infant mortality in the borough and low birth weight babies are all largely occurring in poorer wards. Greater Manchester Poverty Action reported earlier this year about the notable numbers of people in deprived wards living without a cooker and or without a freezer and or without a washing machine and or without a fridge. Now, this is the people we serve. We need local government assistance to help those areas. The Cabinet have at their fingertips mechanisms by which targeted support can be delivered should they desire to do so. This is at the heart of the matter. It boils down to Cabinet choices and a commitment towards where there is great need and where local government can help improve lives. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Howarth. Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The End Poverty Report in 2018 and others, which predated the funding changes, highlighted that there were parts of our borough which also required financial attention for deprivation. Horwich North East being only one of those, where it was reported that 1 in 5 children in that ward were impoverished. This finding was a real eye-opener, as previously it had received very little neighbourhood funding. The fact is, poverty is not always confined by geographical boundaries, due to it being either absolute or relative. For clarification, absolute equating to not having the income for the necessities in life, and relative of having a significantly less than average income within society. Thus, the finite funding available needs to be apportioned as wisely as possible. The new funding formula took account of this, recognising for the first time in years that deprivation was more widespread across the borough, whilst also acknowledging that historically more depressed areas were in need of a more targeted, multi-professional and multidisciplinary approach. The Marmot Report 10-year review published this year has highlighted that deprivation, health and social inequality is worse now across England than a decade ago. But Marmot highlights that central to deprivation and social inequality is the need to address health inequality and for a local government to work towards achieving a goal of environmental sustainability. To this end, we have considered the wider determinants of health as salient factors in deprivation and have therefore created the ACP board, building on the wellbeing agenda. Our new JSNA will support this board by providing robust and contemporary evidence of where our focus and attention needs to be. If communities are active, meaning healthy, connected, meaning being more aware of service provision through effective communication and education, our families can become more self-empowered to prosper. Further, the ICP Integrated Care Partnership will enable all service providers to work collaboratively and smarter across the neighbourhoods to put their energies into addressing the different needs within our wards. Deprivation will be reduced by a combination of efforts between the Council, the Foundation Trust, the CCG and the voluntary sector, and importantly by the input of residents themselves. We have already started by developing the healthy choices and healthy weight strategies and prioritising mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baines. Councillor Muslim.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This motion before us tonight is an opportunity for us to tell the people of Bolton that we are committed to ensuring that their tax, which they have worked hard for, is going to be spent in a fair and equitable way. This motion is not, as Councillor Peel would have us believe, about the council turning its back on those who need our help the most. For too long, money has been handed out across certain areas of Bolton, but has done little to alleviate deprivation. Councillor Peel talks about wanting to narrow the gap. We must ask ourselves, if that is the case, why didn't he do that when he was part of the Labour administration running this town? Why, under Bolton Labour, did super output areas show deprivation at 92%, whereas in Labour-run Wigan neighbouring us, it decreased by 92% in those areas? And the answer is perfectly clear. It's the deprivation formula that was comprised by the previous Labour administration was not worth the paper it was written on. And members can make up their own mind as to why certain areas received most funding. But I'm actually pleased that Labour members opposite supported the Lib Dem motion at the last full council meeting, because what that did was give the Labour Party the opportunity to agree with us. And in that motion, which I have a copy of the report here, it clearly stated, and I will read so there's no confusion, that under section B, the committee affirms that the resources targeted in this way must be closely monitored to ensure that the desired outcomes are being achieved, and believes that in the past this has not always been the case. And this was voted for by all the Labour members, Councillors Abdullah, Ayub, Cunliffe, Darvesh, Donaghy, Evans, Howarth, Ibrahim, Karam, McKeon, McMulkin, Mistry, Morris, Murray, Peel, Sherrington, Sylvester, Thomas, Waters and Zaman. You all voted in that motion to accept that previous money had been awarded under your flawed deprivation formula and had not always been spent in the way that achieved positive outcomes, and had willfully not been monitored to assess its impact. And that's frankly disgraceful. Disgraceful really that you can sit there on some imaginary high horse and talk down to us seeking to level the playing field. And before Madam Mayor was Mayor, Councillor Thomas spoke at Cabinet, and she spoke of levels of child poverty across the borough, of something I am personally wanting to see as little as possible. But she highlighted that there was a 15% level of child poverty in the ward that received the least amount of funding under the old formula. But let's just think about that. Because why is a child that is in poverty given zero support under your flawed formula just because they so happen that they live around those that are better off than themselves? Why is that child worth any less to your party than a child in Halliwell or Runworth? It's frankly shameful. Now, if you're comfortable to go knock on doors of those wards and tell the residents that despite having those in need around them, that they're not going to get the same level of support because you'd rather funnel it elsewhere, then be my guest and vote for this motion tonight. But I know that I'm comfortable to go out there to the residents of Bolton and tell them that how we are delivering for them and their neighbours, no matter where they live. We as Conservatives are making sure that the majority of this town will benefit from this new funding stream. And we as an administration are committed to actually narrowing the gap rather than just talking about it. We've committed to it in our 25-point agreement, which you're so keen to remind us of frequently, even though we don't really need that reminder. And we will continue to use deprivation indices where appropriate in tackling poverty. We will review the formula and we will make the changes required, and we will do this openly and transparently, and we will tackle deprivation. But to stick with the flawed status quo, which you all acknowledge was flawed, frankly, was never an option. And I must just pick up that, again, the point I made numerous times, that 12 out of the 20 wards see an uplift in this new funding at the moment. And Councillor Peel mentioned Farnworth, but also he admitted really that neighbouring Kersley has seen an 82% uplift in their funding. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the Council. In the spirit of the theme of narrowing the gap in these difficult times, I hope just to make a couple of comments and first take this opportunity to put on record my admiration and congratulations to Andrea Greenall from Kersley on the news of her inclusion on the Queen's Birthday Honours list. Andrea has been awarded the British Empire Medal for her services to the NHS during the COVID-19 pandemic. And a massive well done to Andrea. And I think Andrea symbolises all of the key workers in our community during these devastating times. And also, obviously, just to add, many congratulations to Julie Oldham and Albert Aspen on their honours as well. Can I also take this opportunity, Madam Mayor, to express my gratitude to you for championing local businesses and local high streets across the borough at these difficult times. Also for your recent letters of recognition, which you wrote to many community groups and businesses and individuals in Farnworth and Kersley and across the borough, which highlighted and thanked the many brilliant efforts and acts of resilience during these challenging times. To let you know that your letters have aided ward councillors in completing further nominations for awards of recognition in the spirit of narrowing the gap. So thank you very much. And also really quickly, I've said this a couple of times in closed meetings, but my continued respect to the 8 political groups that make up this council for how we are collectively and conscientiously approaching this multifaceted crisis together, putting community interests first. So on to the business of Councillor Peel's motion. I will obviously be supporting Nick. I think Councillor Peel is right in his summary of the events leading up to Cabinet's decision last year. I strongly believe that the principle of narrowing the gap should be at the heart of everything that this council does. At the time of the decision last year, many councillors and group leaders, as Councillor Peel has quite rightly said, including myself, urged repeatedly that the Cabinet opt to review neighbourhood management funding first, look at the processes, look at the allocations, and then amend accordingly afterwards. Cabinet decided contrary to this. As has been mentioned by Councillor Muslim, down here, Kersley Ward now gets more money, and obviously Arthur Green and Farnworth does see a drop in the monies. However, the encouraging news is that the 9 councillors covering Arthur Green, Kersley and Farnworth have continued to work cross-party, as we always have, and have ensured that the community groups narrowing the gap that we were supporting before Cabinet's decision are continuing to receive the support after the decision. Nevertheless, we must be frank here and acknowledge that the world we now adopt is monumentally more challenging. Money is ultra tight, and narrowing the gap and targeting the limited funding we will have is going to be vitally important. I therefore fully agree with Council reaffirming tonight its commitment to the principle of narrowing the gap, and the targeted evidence-based funding to areas of deprivation should be at the centre of this review. And we've got to ensure that we walk the walk when we talk about the so-called Bolton 2030 vision, starting well, living well and ageing well. This review has got to happen as soon as possible, and I urge that we try and get it into the diary sharpish. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Hayes.
Red square. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Labour are beginning to actually overplay their hand on this a little bit. There's no doubt in my mind that there was a review necessary, because the way this funding was allocated has been flawed and has been skewed. There's been a commitment from the Conservative leadership that they will look after the disadvantaged and they will protect the people who are less able to look after themselves. And the other groups will hold them to that. And I've got to be fair, all the signs initially were that they intended to honour that. I think this particular instance was a great opportunity for them to demonstrate at very little cost, that they were sincere in that. And I think this is actually, although it's only, what, £300,000, sorry, Cliff Morris, I know you're not here, but £300,000 seems a fairly significant figure. But I think they had an opportunity to demonstrate, and I think they missed that opportunity by emphasising the fact that they were concentrating on their pledges. Again, I would remind them, your pledges come into play when you win the election. When you do not win the election, you have to be prepared to modify on those principles and those pledges. And I think that was a big mistake they made, and that was partly built out of arrogance, I think. So we, I think, now have to make sure that a review happens, have to make sure there's a very strong recognition that we target money to the areas that need it, but we target it efficiently and do it correctly. I will be urging my group to support this motion, but as I say, I think there's danger of going over the top if we're not careful. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I was elected in May 2018, area neighbourhood management funding was like a secret club. It was not discussed at area forum meetings with members of the public. It was not discussed at scrutiny meetings. And even after requesting information specifically on the subject, it was excluded from all emails regarding area forum budgets. It was only when a separate meeting was called with Bolton at Home and ward councillors that I found out what the previous year had been spent on and proposals for the coming year. There was no monitoring reports, no evaluations of outcomes, no impact statements. In fact, £4,000 had been used to plant wildflowers on Bolton at Home land. Bolton at Home had developed projects which targeted a small area of the ward. And it also completely ignored areas of the ward that had similar levels of deprivation, but was not in an area of Bolton at Home properties. £10,000 had been spent on a project, which again, there was no monitoring reports. There was no positive outcomes. I showed my utter astonishment at how this money had been used and questioned how it had impacted and the outcomes that it had had regarding deprivation in the area. The funding was not creating stronger, resilient communities, but continuing in a culture of dependence, which the same groups and individuals were benefiting from. In fact, one individual who was an opposition candidate actually even said to me when I questioned this funding that they hadn't received their wages because I'd caused a halt to it, because I'd asked for further proposals and further ways that this money could benefit more residents. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the projects have been very good. And I could go on about the issues regarding breakneck funding, but I won't. But the sad fact, it's been used inappropriately for many years because there hasn't been the monitoring and reporting or even a defined desired outcome of what this funding was actually for. The groups can still access the Bolton Fund via CVS, and support and money will be delivered through that fund for projects in all areas of the borough that typically received funding previously. With the JSNA and a clear desired outcome, monitoring and evaluation, this can make the funding actually count and improve the outcomes for our residents without political face-fitting. It needs to be transparent and it needs to be fair. And at the moment, I don't think that the previous proposals ever did that. And so I'm against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Councillor Newall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As colleagues, ex-colleagues in the Labour Party will know, I used to have quite a passionate opinion about this matter, and I can remember conversations that we had about the deprivation fund and how it was allocated. And as a breakneck councillor, obviously we benefited from that fund greatly. I have mellowed a bit in as much as I can see now, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I do think that that fund should be spread wider than it was. It did need reviewing, and that the funding does need to be spread over a wider area. But what concerns me is the premise that you can treat all wards the same, because you can't. It's not a cake that you can divide up into 20 slices. It really isn't. You know, what is classed as deprivation in one ward would be loved in another ward. You know, some wards have total deprivation that other wards couldn't even dream about. And we've got to recognise that. We've got to recognise the great disparity across the ward. So I will support this, and I will support Councillor Peel in this. And I think we ought to be wary of, you know, doing things for the sake of it. And like Councillor Hayes said, a pledge is a pledge, and you can implement that pledge when you win an election. But we need to recognise, and we need to not lose sight of the areas of deprivation in our borough, and we owe it to the residents there to keep our promises to them, as well as recognising the needs, obviously, of residents in our other wards too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newell. Excuse me, Councillor Hornby.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Councillor Peel made a very impressive statement with regard to his motion, and he'll be surprised to know that we will support his motion tonight. He made a comment that it's the minority parties which are propping up the current administration, and I think, as he's already heard from the other minority groups, we broadly agree with a lot of what he said. However, what I will say is this, and as I have said on many occasions, it's all right pumping vast sums of money into deprived areas year after year after year, but if you're still doing it 10, 15 years on, it's not working. So we have to put something in place whereby we can see outcomes and we can see change. If it's not working, change it. Do something different. Look at other local authorities, perhaps away from Greater Manchester, to see how they are doing it. I remember asking the director of place in another meeting in another place last year with regard to the formula that we used for calculating deprivation. And the director of place said we've been using the wrong formula for quite some time. That, in my opinion, is something that should have been picked up a long time ago. So I will support the motion tonight, and I will urge my other colleague to support the motion as well. But I would ask that in doing so, we ensure that new things are put in place in order that we can see better outcomes and a lot quicker than they have done in the past. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hornby. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, quite a few things as we move through the speakers that I was going to cover have been covered now. I do think that Councillor Peel and Councillor Howarth are, way off mark on this. As has already been alluded to for many, many years. In fact, Councillor Hornby, I couldn't put it better myself than he just did. The money has been spent in certain wards over many, many years without actually getting the outcomes we wanted. It's been pouring good money after bad. I mean, for the first time in 40 years, this administration has brought in fair funding where we get an equal split between the wards, so that wards that have previously missed out, Kersley being one of them, my own ward, actually got something worthwhile this time. Yes, Farmouth got less, we got more, but it's the first time in probably in 40 years that it's happened. And the fact to start bemoaning us a Christmas tree or any other ward a Christmas tree seems a little bit petty. I think it comes down to the basics of, as again has been said, if you're spending money and not seeing a return on it over all the years that it's been done, then you've got to look at why and actually say who is it benefiting. And it was only benefiting in most cases one part of the areas that it was being spent in. We need change. I'm a bit disappointed that the other parties seem inclined to support this motion tonight, because I think it sends the wrong message both to the Labour Party itself and to the residents in Bolton in all the other wards. It says that you're possibly, having had 1 year of actual fairer funding, you seem to be withdrawing some support for that. I don't think that will go down well in the electorate. Thank you.
Councillor Zaman.
Madam Mayor, thank you. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I will now very briefly. Councillor Muslim's speech was full of very angry and dramatic words such as shameful, disgraceful, etc. The only thing I can think of is that we may have hit a raw nerve somewhere. But if we look at what he said in relation to narrowing the gap, his argument seems to be very logical and irrational, because when we look at gaps between areas, we look at different indicators, health, for example, housing, economic prosperity, and what that tells us, or the evidence tells us in Bolton, is that areas like Heaton and Lostock, Bromley Cross, they do better than areas like Halliwell, Great Lever, Rumworth, and other inner areas. So in order to address that issue, we then target resources on areas where there is need. So if you take away resources from those areas and spread those resources in areas like Heaton and Lostock, Bromley Cross, and other affluent areas, how do you address the gap that exists between affluent areas and our inner areas? I just don't understand the logic behind this. Behind this argument.
I'm first taking this opportunity to put on record my admiration and congratulations.
Sorry, is somebody else trying to?
Councillor Sanders, I believe, but he's gone.
Okay, Councillor Hayes, I'm glad that he's supporting this motion, and Councillor Hornby, but I think you need to understand that the Tories have done this in your name, because you put these people in power, and they have done this because of that position that they are in, and that position was given to them by yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zaman. Councillor Greenosh, Leader of Council. Apologies. Could I have Councillor McKeon before Councillor Greenosh? Sorry about that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the Council. There are lots of issues within this motion that aren't controversial. Poverty, social and economic deprivation, the realities in the United Kingdom and in Bolton. And I'm not going to recite the statistics that give evidence of that. Councillor Howard did that very cogently earlier on. We're all very, very aware of them. And we also know that we live in a country which is the most centralised in Europe. So it's national government which really has the levers which can address poverty. And references have been made to the apparent failure of previous Labour attempts to narrow the gap. But essentially, the only way that poverty can be alleviated under our current system is if efforts are made by central government. And I was astonished to hear Councillor Bain's speech. She seemed to ignore the fact that we've had 10 years of austerity. Professor Marmot rightly points out that we've been going backwards. Why have we been going backwards? Because of the austerity policies, politically motivated, of originally the coalition government and then the Tory government. Local councils can mitigate those difficulties caused by poverty. We're very, very limited in what we can do. But although we are limited, we have a moral responsibility to do what we can. It's certainly the stance that the Labour group took when in control of the council. And Councillor Greenosh has similarly and publicly committed himself and his group to addressing the causes and consequences of poverty. When in power, the Labour government put in place policies and practices that we felt made an effective impact on the distress and damage caused by poverty. And recently we had a breakdown of the monies that were spent over the years. And if you look at it carefully, you see a huge amount of that was spent on children, activities for children, welfare of children. So I think there's evidence there of the effectiveness of the money. However, it's also, I don't think, controversial to argue that these policies and practices ought to be scrutinised and, if found wanting, changed and even abandoned. And Councillor Warren made a persuasive speech that obviously scrutiny, looking at outcomes, is important and perhaps at times wasn't done effectively. However, what is controversial and unacceptable is to abandon those initiatives in the middle of a municipal year without an alternative. We as a council need to address the needs of the less affluent members of our society in this borough, and it's important that we do it together. We've had a PGD recently, as Councillor Peel said, on the cost of damaged bins. Well, we need an open and transparent debate within a PDG to look at the needs of the deprived areas and deprived residents in our borough. But what disturbs me most is the arguments that I think, in a sense, Councillor Cunningham put forward about fairer funding. Is it really fair that Heaton, Lostock, Bromley Cross get exactly the same funding as Farnworth? Is it really fair that well-off neighbourhoods get exactly the same funding as those that are obviously deprived? Councillor Newall spoke very, very effectively on this, and I totally agree with what she says. Deprivation in one area does not look like the deprivation in other areas. So this idea that every ward should have exactly the same money, it does not reek of fairness at all. And a fair-minded person would surely accept that. So in conclusion, of course, I'm going to support Councillor Councillor Peel's motion, and I call upon all members of the council to support it. We must do what we can, limited as it is, for deprived neighbourhoods, and we have to recognise that it's neighbourhoods that are deprived. and some areas are far more in need than others, and it's need we must address. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKeon. Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And as Councillor McKeon said, this is a complex issue on many levels, and the debate is also on many levels. And I want to begin by saying that it is still a commitment of this administration to reduce poverty and reduce deprivation. And I say that, and I reaffirm that commitment. I also want to put this in the context of where we were at the end of the last Labour administration. And we had for a considerable length of time, we had all witnessed, as has been said by numerous speakers tonight, years of funding, and I'm going to say done with the best intent, millions of pounds over many years, millions, into areas of the town that had produced very little outcome. We had a flawed process, very eloquently spoken about by Councillor Warren, her own personal experience of that process. A flawed process. We even had the last Labour administration, after they had been considerably asked on numerous occasions to prove the effectiveness of the deprivation formula, we had a Labour administration that had to call an informal council to tell us and admit that it was out of date, flawed and wrong, and that it had to be recalculated. The money that was spent with that neighbourhood money was identified in lists that we all received when we were councillors, asking for those lists, that we all saw incredible gaps in information and detail. And at no time, more importantly, were outcomes measured. And as has also been spoken of by a speaker tonight, our deprivation levels did not improve. They were still the same. And what have we done? And it was pointed out as well by Councillor Hayes that we're talking about that fateful figure again of £300,000, because in reality, that is what was left in the area forum and neighbourhood management pot. And that was decided by us rather than split. And I think the worse off wards would lose 15,000. We decided to split it evenly, but make a commitment that we would do things differently. And Councillor McKeon said, without an alternative, and he is wrong. We did provide an alternative, and we will continue to look for more alternatives. And that alternative was within the Bolton Fund and within the piece of work that you all highly commended when it was brought before you, the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, which for the first time identified our areas that we needed to improve, the main challenges that we as a borough faced. And that Joint Strategic Needs Assessment fed into the £2.5 million funding that we as a council extended into that pot for the CVS, so that those community groups that we supported as local councillors through our neighbourhood funding could then access, not through politicians, which is the main cause of, I think, a lot of the problem. It took politics out of the decision making and it put it to experts, panels, community workers themselves, who the CVS brought together to identify. And speakers from the Labour benches have said tonight, children, young people, older people, these are all areas of the JSNA. These are all areas over the next few months that will be able to bid for funding up to 50,000, funding over 100,000, much more than the £300,000 pot that we had over 20 wards. And this money can be targeted and targeted efficiently into those areas and targeted where there is most need. And that is the important. So there is an alternative. to what we have done. What we had by the end of it, and I'm not, we have savings to make this year, and I'm not looking and blaming any other administration before us for making savings they had to. But the pot of money that was left in area forum and neighbourhood management was simply insufficient for the challenges that we have in Bolton. And we have to build on, as we are doing. We've got commitment from the CCG now to add into that Bolton fund to target not only health inequalities, but poverty, economic inequalities, and make sure that we do clamp down on poverty and deprivation in this town in a meaningful way, and more importantly, judge outcomes. And I want to quickly mention about the review.
Could I just intercede, Leader? I'm being told you've had 5 minutes.
I will just mention this point if I can. I'll be very brief, Madam Mayor, but it's hugely important. The review was never intended to be a PDG. It was supposed to be a much more larger piece of work where we brought in LGA representatives and actually looked across parties together, similar to how we did in planning, similar how we did to licensing, to conduct a meaningful review. And I only yesterday spoke with the chief executive, because as that has had to be delayed because of COVID, and that it was put on the agenda to sort out as immediately as we could to get those people in to review the whole process, and not just have a talking shop of our councillors, but to have independent experts come in and express how we can best target that neighbourhood work. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made tonight from all members of the council. And when Councillor Newall was talking about many debates that we had within the Labour group, specifically around the funding with the area monies, it was broken then, and it's still broken now. And when we talk about morals, how can anybody see that it's fair that some areas receive over £100,000 in funding and other areas only get £20,000? In West Horton, which is the area I represent, we have some serious areas of deprivation here. Although our area, this ward, is classed as an affluent area, but we still have a duty of care and responsibility to those people that we represent within this area. The whole system really does need re-looking at, because it isn't fair and it isn't just, and it's a very difficult situation, because we do very clearly need to target areas of deprivation, and we need to make sure that the money is provided for those areas, not just for the sake of it, but for targeted work that is done and the outcomes are measured and the success is recorded and achieved. And it can't just be money for nothing. It's got to be for the right reasons, in the right places, in the right area. But it also needs to be fair, because everybody has to deal with this. It's not an isolated incident. And when we were talking about funding for the roads, that was absolutely spot on. In my opinion, it was spot on, and it should have been divided equally, and it was divided equally, because roads, pavements, potholes do not understand deprivation. They are bad, and they were bad everywhere. But the system is broken and it needs fixing. And the sooner we do it and stop arguing about it, the better it'll be for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But equally, if it is broken, it needs fixing. I think that's the situation we're in today. Councillor McKeown tries to make a virtue of policies implemented by previous administration. But I remind him of something I've said many times in the council chamber, and Councillor Muslin referred to it tonight. How can it be that two adjoining authorities, on an independent assessment of the deprivation and progress, find that in one authority 92% of wards improve and the gap narrows, and in the adjoining authority 92% the gap widens? That could only say in the latter authority the system is broken and failed, and Bolton was that and is that authority, and therefore the need to address the fundamental issues is absolutely clear to anyone who looks at it fairly and with an open eye and an open mind. And sadly, there are two members of this council who don't have that open mind approach to these matters. The fact is that every ward in this borough has pockets of deprivation. In some cases, it is more apparent than in others, but there is hidden deprivation in many areas, and therefore equity and fairness in distribution of a relatively small sum of money, I think, is hugely important. If you put that alongside the fundamental review which has taken place and the shift in policy that's taken place in recent months by this administration in bringing about a much larger pot of money to be distributed across the borough on a fair basis by independent review through CVS and other bodies, but actually funding that has generated further funds because other organisations have been prepared to support it. That surely is indicative of the fact that what was a broken system has at least been replaced with something which is progressing towards a fairer system, more equitable system, and one that we can support it. And for that reason, I understand why the Labour Party members get uptight about it. They have been bound by a system they've employed for many years, and they don't want to admit, Councillor Peel won't admit, that what he has been supporting for the last number of years has failed. The time for change has come. The time for change is here. This is the opportunity to progress that change, accepting that there might be further fine refinement necessary, but at least fine-tuning is opportune given the change that's taking place. I cannot support the motion. I find it flawed in every respect, and for that reason, I don't believe it's one that is appropriate for this council this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Brady.
Thank you, Madam Councillors. Every ward has affluence and deprivation within it. I see that very plainly in Horwich, where I represent, Horwich North. There are parts that are very affluent, there are parts that are extremely deprived. We see this in the prevalence of antisocial behaviour, youth provision, UCAN centres. We have nothing like that. The biggest problem we have, health centre. We talk about health deprivation. We've been promised a health centre for God knows how many years. There's still no sign of it. And yet I look at a neighbouring borough, Wigan, who've had the Wigan Pledge, and I look at the outcomes of that, and I think that, yes, we do have to have a review in Bolton, and we have to do it in a fairer way, and it's got to be targeted, but it's got to be reviewed because, as the councillors have said, the system at the moment is broken and it's not benefiting anybody. So the sooner we have this review, the better. Thank you.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it's late, so I won't say much. I just wanted to point out, though, I think it's an extremely misleading debate. I think Councillor Hayes says we are talking about a relatively tiny amount of money in comparison with the council's overall resources, the vast majority of which, and we are talking about tens of millions of pounds, perhaps hundreds of millions of pounds, go to
narrowing the gap and supporting areas of deprivation, and to try and portray this as being taking huge resources out of the poorer areas of the borough and spending them in the more affluent areas, I think is deeply misleading. We've had a lot of talk, particularly from Labour members, about poverty. Well, what we've seen in this council over many decades is a poverty of ambition, and I'll just take one area of the town as an example. I'll use the area of Farnworth. Now, members have spoke about narrowing the gap with a pot of £300,000. Look what we've been able to do over the last few months. We have got a bid in for Farnworth, a transformational bid of £19 million. On top of that, we've got the £4 million that was allocated to Farnworth Town Centre. Added to that, we're spending £1.5 million on improving the highways and footways of Farnworth. So we have got an absolute commitment to some of the areas of deprivation. And I think what some of the Labour members who have spoke tonight should ask themselves is why, after so many years where the Labour Party have controlled these areas, why after 10 years of a Conservative government, which they continue to portray as 10 years of austerity, have these areas turned their back on them in such big numbers, and not just the electorate refusing to elect Labour councillors, but Labour councillors themselves defecting from the Labour group. What I believe we've seen over many years is a poverty of ambition for some of these areas, and I think we're doing an awful lot to put that right, and to try and portray this relatively small pot as some sort of massive redistribution from the poorer areas of the town to the richest is deeply misleading, and I don't think the public will buy it. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Flitcroft. Sorry, Councillor Flitcroft.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I will really be quick on this because I know we are late. Listening to what everybody's got to say tonight, I think one thing that's jumping out and hitting me in the face is that the review needs to be done. This is what's frustrating a lot of people, that things were changed and this review was going to happen, but we're still waiting. I understand that things, the formula wasn't right and things like that, but it needs to be done, and it needs to be done correctly. And then I think a lot of people will be happy with what comes out of that if it gets done ASAP. It's just the delay people are not happy with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flitcroft. Councillor Iqbal, do you want to speak now?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members, Madam Mayor, I am seconding this motion because Conservatives' decision to move away from targeted funding is contrary to all principles of fairness and natural justice. This council has always worked on the basis that we support those that are in the greatest need, and we support those communities and areas that suffer the highest level of deprivation. The Tories have replaced this, thereby hitting the most vulnerable in our communities. Instead, they have directed money to areas where people are less deprived. This is unacceptable and is contrary to the views of the majority of the councillors of this. We could understand equal funding for every ward if the deprivation was same in every ward. But Madam Mayor, poverty is not equal across the borough. A report from End Child Poverty Coalition shows that 55% of deprivation in Great Lever compared to 18% in Bromley Cross. How can you have equal funding with such a disparity in deprivation? Some areas of Bolton need more funding than others to address this issue. To remove funding from these areas can only lead to worsening the situation of deprivation. Of course, retaining funds in these areas does not make deprivation go away, but it does provide essential help to the individual families who need it the most. I have some examples, projects that we were directing this money to. Projects such as support the environment and enforcement, which are deprived ward-like Great River needs. For example, extra hours for emergency fly tipping and general cleaning. Project like play session, because a great deal of housing in Great River have no gardens. We funded play sessions at Bradford Park, run by Bolton Wanderers Community Trust, like football and cricket. Inspirations, a joint project with Harper Green Ward, encouraging primary pupils to have aspirations for higher plans for their future, as many children in the ward have English as second language. Friday evening youth sessions at Haywood Park, partnership working with council staff, Greater Manchester Police, exit team to disperse antisocial behavior, activities keeping young people safe, also funded on infrared camera to identify perpetrators. These are some of the examples that we were targeting funding towards. Madam Mayor, these are all appropriate projects in order to tackle deprivation. The Tories argue that the previous spend is inappropriate and Labour were buying votes. This is an outrageous accusation. As we have seen from Great River spend, there is no evidence to back this up. Some wards do tend to receive more in targeted deprivation funding, but that's only because it is those wards that have the highest deprivation. This is not a political decision, as Farmworth and Bridemade, not Labour wards, should also be targeted. As I have told you about the projects, can someone tell me which of these should not have been funded and which of these we are to cancel? And what do we tell the people who benefit from these projects? Madam Mayor, in my opinion, Councillor Greenhalgh was very eloquent with his words, but fact of the matter is that he is removing much needed monies from the people who require the most support in our borough. And I request that he reverses this flawed decision, and I urge members to support Councillor Peel's just and worthy motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Peel, do you wish your right to reply?
Yeah, I do, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Madam Mayor. There's a lot been said, and even though I disagree with a lot of the arguments, I think it's been a very, very good debate for this council. I want to start by saying that Councillor Cox is right, and I'm really glad he said that. That the bulk of funding in this borough that is aimed at tackling deprivation and narrowing the gap, there's nothing to do with neighbourhood management. But nobody from your group has a problem with that. If you actually take their arguments to logical conclusion, the things that Councillor Muslim, Councillor Walsh says, trying to hoodwink the council into thinking that deprivation is equal across all wards, then you, Councillor Cox and Councillor Greenhalgh, will be fundamentally changing the way that those millions that you mentioned is allocated. You're not fundamentally changing that because you accept that money needs to be targeted at narrowing the gap. You accept that as a Tory council. So why are you so against this smaller pot being targeted? That's where the mystery is. And Councillor Cox is also right. Again, the most direct route out of poverty is good qualifications and well-paid jobs. That is exactly why the Labour Council set this borough on course for huge investment in Bolton and in the townships that Councillor Cox is quite cheekily trying to take the credit for. And I've got to tell the Tory councillors who spoke on this, deprivation is about worklessness, it's about low qualifications, it's about poor housing, it's about crime, it's about poor health. But in some parts of this borough, all of those factors are concentrated in particular areas. This is what this point is about. Those concentrations do not happen in the more affluent wards. And you need to understand this. If you represent an affluent ward, yes, of course you get individual cases. Of course you do. But you need to recognise that they are concentrated in other wards through a multiple of reasons, that many historical. And if COVID has taught us one thing, and Councillor Baines knows this full well, the inequalities, including health, but other inequalities in this borough, have a direct correlation with concentrations of infection rates in the borough. She knows that as the lead on this, and yet seems to be turning a blind eye that these concentrations of deprivation are somehow irrelevant. I genuinely believe that Conservative councillors like Nadine Muslin and Mark Cunningham are just not listening to the argument. And don't forget, it was previous Tory governments under Thatcher or Major who introduced the concepts of targeted funding, you know, so they recognise that. I want to thank councillors like Hayes and Councillor Flitcroft, etc. They're not Councillor Hayes and Councillor Paul Heslop, sorry. They're not beneficiaries of this, yet they recognise the concept of targeted funding in their neighbouring wards. That's something that they're prepared to do, but the Tory councillors aren't prepared to do it. And I do appreciate the feedback from Hayes, Saunders, Hornby, etc., in waving a bit of a finger at Labour and saying, well, you know, you could have done it better. We accepted that. We always accepted that there should be a review. We always accepted that things needed to be reformed. We were always happy to look at the tighter parameters of what the funding was spent on. We made all these arguments, but what we didn't accept was scrapping the schemes before the review. That's the point that you're not acknowledging. And secondly, and I've got to repeat the point, and Councillor Hayes has repeated it as well, we're very firm on the issue of mandates. Mandates is very important when you have a minority administration that's doing something against the wishes of the majority. You were very clear about majority wins in the Brexit debate, but that doesn't seem to be an issue now for people like Councillor Cunningham and Councillor Walsh. The majority in this chamber don't like what you're doing. Why aren't you listening to the majority? Why aren't you listening to democracy? I want to leave you with this final thing. Town councillors put some of their neighbourhood management into additional resources in the Castle Hill Centre. You know, uses that Castle Hill Centre. Kids from Bradshaw, kids from Bromley Cross, kids from Crompton, kids from Braitmate, and kids from Tong. We're not saying it's just for the kids in Tong, you know, so your argument gets challenged there again. Your children in Bradshaw, where you have antisocial behaviour problems, directly benefit from our neighbourhood management funding into Castle Hill Centre. Please think about that. I'm glad that Councillor Greenhouse reaffirmed his commitment to narrowing the gap. I hope he does have a word with some of his perhaps more right-wing colleagues who've said some unfortunate things tonight. And can I also just say thank you to Councillor Flitcroft, who pretty much summed it up, didn't she, when she said, what we're saying with this motion is please get on with it. Can we please have the review? Spot on, Councillor Flitcroft. So I would say to David Greenhouse, Leader of the Council, when this motion is passed, which it will be, can you please contact me and can you please give me an indication as to when this review is going to happen? We've been waiting far too long. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peel. The Chief Exec will now take a named vote. Before we take the name vote, it's nearly 10:20. And I don't feel, therefore, that we could proceed to a motion after the name vote, because I don't feel we would do the motion justice. So after this name vote, that will be the end of the council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So here we are, the last vote of the evening. Here we go. Councillor Baines.
Against.
Councillor Connor.
Against.
Councillor Cox.
Against.
Councillor Cunningham.
Against.
Councillor Dean.
Against.
Councillor Fairclough.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Galloway,
Against.
Councillor Greenhouse,
Against.
Councillor Haslam,
Against.
Councillor Hewitt,
Against.
Councillor Muslim,
Against.
Councillor Parkinson,
Against.
Councillor Radcliffe,
Against.
Councillor Walsh,
Against.
Councillor Warren,
Against.
Councillor Wild,
Against.
Councillor Abdullah,
For.
Councillor Adia,
For.
Councillor Ayub,
For.
Councillor Donaghy,
For.
Councillor Evans,
For.
Councillor Howard,
For.
Councillor Ibrahim,
For.
Councillor Iqbal,
For.
Councillor Karam,
For.
Councillor McKeon,
For.
Councillor Mystery,
For.
Councillor Murray,
For.
Councillor Peel,
For.
Councillor Sherrington,
For.
Councillor Sylvester,
For.
Councillor Zaman,
For.
thank you. Councillor Bagnall,
For.
Councillor Exley Fallon,
For.
Councillor Hayes,
For.
Councillor McGeehan,
For.
Councillor Newell,
For.
Councillor Vivers,
For.
Councillor Flitcroft,
For.
Councillor Patterson,
For.
Councillor Sanders,
For.
Councillor Weatherby,
For.
Councillor Darvish,
For.
Councillor Ishmael,
For.
Councillor Brady,
Against.
Councillor Wright,
Against.
Councillor Heslop,
For.
Councillor Waters,
For.
Councillor Gibbon,
For.
Councillor Hornby,
For.
Councillor Allen,
Against.
Hello.
Councillor Bullock. Is that you, Councillor Bullock, on the phone? I'm going to come back to you in a second. Councillor Cunliffe.
For.
Could you just repeat that, Councillor Cunliffe?
For.
Apologies. For. Thank you, Councillor Cunliffe. Councillor Bullock, are you on the line? If you could indicate in the chat if you can't come on the call, you're the last councillor to vote. Any indication, Ian? We'll just check in the chat. I'm going to go on mute for a second anyway. So 1 second. Sorry, councillors, for the slight delay there. The motion is carried. Madam Mayor, that concludes the business of the council.
Okay, that's the end of the council. Could I thank everybody for their attendance this evening?
No.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you,
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.